So in our effort to repair that shameful thing that we did, we now have a way to repair the problem that we caused by oversleeping and having to be awakened by Moses, and by that God passed down to us. If you have questions during any of the evening, because we're built in to every talk a little time for questions and answers, just raise your actual physical hand and you can ask a question. I want to be very low tech tonight. Matt, ground rules.
Yeah, well, thank you, Wacky, for that introduction to the ground rules. And I think what Wacky did, that exercise to announce your name, was really to see whether or not you guys can mute and unmute yourself. So that was just a practice for that, and also to remind yourself of who you are, of course. So thank you, everybody. It sounds like everybody can mute and unmute. So that's a good reminder. Try to stay muted unless you are talking. That's the main ground rule. I just started recording. So I think what we'll do is when somebody is speaking, I'll spotlight that person. So when you spotlight somebody, then in the recording, nobody else is visible. That's what's happened before. So in case you're concerned about that. And we're only going to store this on the CBE website for future reference. So I think those are the only ground rules. Wacky did say that, well, I'll just add one more. If you do have a question during a presentation, just physically raise your hand. If you do want to put something in the chat as a question, you can do that as well. I think for each presentation, my experience is that people probably would prefer them to finish the presentation before you ask questions, so don't interrupt. I think most people are like that. So I've also made it so that anybody can share their screen. So I know some people are going to have to share their screen. So that's it. Welcome. Well, I want to share the agenda. This is the agenda.
Leslie, did you have something to add?
Oh, just that we also have a timekeeper, and that would be me.
Thank you, Leslie.
So I'll be reminding people when there's 5 minutes left for them to talk. And then after that, there's still 5 minutes left to have question and answer.
Thank you. So can everybody see the agenda? The order of the Seder of presentations, I guess. Are we good? I'm going to stop sharing.
We only got up to 9:10, Matt.
Oh, okay. I'll do it again. Thank you. So there's the remaining.
There we go.
Hopefully we'll stay up till midnight. Okay, back to you, Wacky.
I don't think there's any back to me. Mike is the first speaker.
Okay.
He's going to speak on corner office, what gleaning and leaving the corners of the field teach us about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay, so let's start our, whoops, that was the wrong button. As always, super grateful for the adult ed team, Leslie and Matt and Wacky and the rest of the team for making this happen. I will jump right in. We'll start off with a blessing for Torah study for the entire night. And here it is. And we'll do this a couple times without words and then once with words. Baruch. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, hafoch ba v'hafoch ba, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Yadadai-dai-dai-dai-dai, yadadai-dai-dai-dai, yadadai-dai-dai-dai, yadadai-dai-dai. And we will jump right in. You feel free to raise your hand or just sort of jump in the chat or interrupt. I do like to be conversational, and when we study, I do know time is limited though. So I often talk in B'nai Mitzvah that we have a Torah, but that is not the only part of our Bible. We have a whole Hebrew Bible. Jews the old set of texts, the new covenant, replacing the old covenant of Torah. Our Torah is Eitz Chaim, a living Torah. Yeah, our texts continue to live. And so I want to take a look at something from the third part of what we call the Tanakh, right? We don't say Old Testament, we say Tanakh. It's an acronym, TNNK. T for Torah, the first 5 books, which we're probably most familiar with if we're familiar with Jewish texts: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The N in Tanakh, the N for Nevi'im, the prophets: Isaiah, Amos, Micah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. It is K, the K in Tanakh for Ketuvim, the writings, where you've got sort of everything else. I sometimes call it the kosher salami of Bible. It's sort of the scraps that are left over from other things, but the rabbis scraped them all together and made said, we want to keep this. So certainly want to keep Proverbs, wisdom literature. We want to keep Psalms. We want to keep a whole bunch of books that are connected to holidays, like the book of Esther connected to, Purim. Ecclesiastes and Kohelet is connected to Sukkot. I won't go through all of them because I don't have time. Book of Ruth is what's connected to Shavuot. And anyone give me like one sentence on, 1 or 2 sentences on what goes on in the book of Ruth. It's not that long. It's 4 chapters. Anyone jump on in? Nobody knows anything about the book of Ruth.
So I think, Mike, I think that you
Yeah.
can't see people raising their hands because we have a screen share.
I can see Rachel raising her hand.
Okay, so maybe we shouldn't be spotlighting somebody. I don't know. I can't see anybody.
I can see everybody. I turned it on
Okay,
to
great.
gallery.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see everybody. I mean, I can see everybody who's got a screen. People who are not on screen.
No, of course. Okay.
Yeah. So Rachel Spira, please tell us about the book of Ruth.
Your people shall be my people.
Okay, so you've got 2 women. It's first of all fantastic. If you want to see strong women and you want to study your feminine verb conjunctions, conjugations rather, not conjunctions. If you want to conjugate Hebrew verbs in the feminine, you see Ruth and Naomi are talking back and forth, and then they're talking together. Naomi has lost her husband and her 2 sons, and they've gone. There's been a famine, and they've gone in search of food. But then all the men die, and Naomi's got 2 daughters-in-law, her sons' wives, Orpah and Ruth. They say, we need to stay with you. And she says, I can't give you any more children. I can't give you a redeemer. You're going to be on your own. Go find another husband. Orpah goes. Ruth says, my people will be your people. And that's why Ruth is this big hero. And eventually she's going to get together with Boaz, who is in the line, in the line of Judah. And they're going to give Boaz and Ruth are going to give birth to a son. It's a happy ending. And the son will be credited to Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, and it becomes one big happy family. That's why sometimes we think of Ruth as a convert, although it doesn't actually say that. She does say, my God, your God is my God, where you go, I go, my people will be, your people will be my people. So it sounds like conversion, right? We think Ruth is pretty awesome. In between, she's got to figure out what they're going to do when they come back to Bethlehem, with Beit Lechem, which is where they go. And how are they going to survive? So let's find out. Naomi, we said, is the mom. Ruth is the daughter-in-law, right? Naomi's husband and 2 sons have died. So let's just read this verses 1 through 6 here of the 2nd chapter of the book of Ruth. Anyone jump on in? Rachel, since you were reading, why don't you read this for us? And Naomi had a relative.
And Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was a relative of Elimelech. And behold,
Elimelech was her husband who died.
And behold, Boaz came from Beit Lechem and said to the reapers, Adoshem will be with you. And they answered him, Adoshem bless you. Then said Boaz to his servant who was set over the reapers, whose maiden is this? And the servant who was set over the reapers answered and said, it is the Moabite maiden who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab.
Okay, and then the ellipsis, ... that's where we figure out, that's how they get together. Yeah? What's going on here? Why is Ruth in some strange guy's field and following along after harvesters? What's going on there? Wacky.
So there's a law that says when you are reaping a field or taking grapes from a vineyard, if something falls down, you got to leave it there so that the poor people can eat it.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm having a little internet trouble. Am I choppy? No, you can hear me? Okay. Rainey, yes, Wacky. Rainey, were you going to say something as well? No.
Just giving a thumbs up.
Thumbs up for that. Yes. So perfect. That's a mitzvah. It's in Torah that when you're harvesting your field, you don't collect everything. So this is harvest time. They know that it's harvest time, and so off they go to a field. They go to a field, and she follows after. Ruth follows after the harvesters, and she collects the stuff that they drop along the way. Right? Because, by the way, since this is between Moab and Judah, these could be international harvesters. No, that's not true. Thank you, Matt, for laughing. I appreciate that. So here is, it's a truck. It's not funny. I'm sorry. Here's one of the times that the mitzvah shows up in the book of Leviticus. And Adonai spoke to Moses saying, Verse 10, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come to the land in which I give to you, and you harvest its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. So first of all, what am I going with harvest, trickle-down economics? That's a good question. So it is economics. I don't think it's trickle-down economics because trickle-down economics says give more to the people who have a lot. Boaz clearly has a lot, right? It says actually, that he's a man of wealth. This is Ish Gibor Chayil. So it could be like a man of renown, a man of strength. He certainly has enough to hire a bunch of harvesters.
Five minutes, Rabbi.
Rabbi, mic cut out for other people too, or is it just me?
Yeah, he's frozen.
He's frozen.
Okay.
I
Hopefully
should
he'll
gotta
come
give him an
back.
extra 5.
Mike, if you can hear us, There you
Okay,
go.
I switched to maybe this will be better. I've got my internet extender here. I thought that would help. So anyway, what I said was that the mitzvah is not that he should get more, but is that he should leave more. The person who has more should leave more. Yeah. Go back here to this mitzvah in Leviticus, which we'll get to that in a second. You bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. We're talking about the that you take an omer. Right? You see here it says omer. The omer reshit, katsir chem. The first sheaf of the first fruits goes to the priest. Right? That's what something we would expect a religious text to say, maybe. And like we've been talking about between Passover and Shavuot, you wave around the omer, you have to give it to the temple, you got to pay your synagogue dues, yeah? I'm gonna fast forward because I'm gonna run out of time. In fact, Ramban is going to say you can't harvest the land until you've harvested the first sheaf and brought it to the priest. Yeah, so we know we've got a religious obligation that's a ritual obligation. Okay, but this is the same chapter, Leviticus 23. There's a whole conversation about holidays, right? Here we go, the Omer, right? But this is what we were talking about before. Uvakutzrechem et katsir artzachem. And when you harvest the harvest, you see that katsir and that kuf tzadi resh root there of your land. Lo tichale pa'at sadacha bekutzrecha. Don't eat up, don't consume all of the corners of your field. Don't glean all of the gleanings, right? Don't take everything. If you're carrying a big load and you drop some, don't say, okay, I'm going to go get that because it's all mine, right? I earned this. Don't do that. Leave them for the poor and for the stranger or for the immigrant, yeah? And who's saying it? I'm saying it. God is saying it, yeah? Okay.
Question.
Yes.
I might be remembering correctly that there was some element about leaving the gleanings and leaving the area so that people could gather it privately and maintain their dignity. And was Ruth right there following the farmer in his presence?
It's a great question. So she's following right after the harvesters. Is she doing that because she doesn't know the mitzvah, because she's not a Jew? Is she doing it because the society has broken down and people don't have the privacy to do that? Notice, or is it just that we don't, it's not totally clear, right? But notice what is being allowed here, right? We've got, what happens in the corner of your field? The corner of your field is the farthest part away from you, right? So we're talking about the corner. The corner is, you leave the corner completely unharvested. The gleanings you drop along the way, you look behind you and maybe pick them up. There's something here that's physical, right? That has to do with your physical proximity to stuff, right? The corners are farther away. You could station a guard there, right? And we actually have laws in our country called stand your ground laws. You may have heard these. If somebody comes on your property in some states, you can kill them. Yeah, that's self-defense, so they say. You could say no trespassing, keep out, private property. Yeah, this is actually saying the exact opposite. This is saying not only should you not do that to people, you're going to expect them to come and take your stuff. That is built into the system. The corner of your field is going to be available. Notice that Ruth is a Moabite. She's not even a Judahite or an Israelite. She's not a Hebrew. And Boaz, who is this model of righteousness, right? Notice how he treats his employees. Yeah. God be with you. Yeah. May the force be with you. Adonai be with you. And they say, Adonai bless you. This is not, unless they're really under his thumb and they're pretending to like him. they have a good relationship. They have God between them, right? They greet each other with God's name. Yeah, this is a guy who seems to be a good guy. And
Rabbi, just so you know, you're in your 5 minutes of Q&A.
yes, I'm going till 8:05. Yeah,
Yeah.
including question time. I know that.
Okay.
Thank you, though. Thank
Sure.
you. So again, notice the difference. Notice the difference between the ways that we have been conditioned to think about private property. Why does this show up in connection with the holidays, with Shavuot? Ibn Ezra, let's see. David Naparstik, would you read Shavuot is the festival of the first fruits?
When you reap the harvest, is that it?
Oh, yeah, when
I see, there we go. Shavuot is a festival of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. So make sure you don't forget what I commanded you about the harvest, Rabbi Abraham ben Ibn Ezra.
Right. So Ibn Ezra, thank you, David, looks at these two texts. Yeah, talking about the harvest, right? This is a ritual offering. Bring an omer to the priest. Yeah. And here, a couple of verses later, we've got, again, harvest, and you leave some for the poor, right? I'm going to talk to you, Ibn Ezra is saying, that the Torah is saying, I'm going to talk to you about leaving the corner and leaving what you drop. Because when you're in the harvest time, when you're taking in your first fruits, maybe you'll think, I got to give it to the priest, I got to keep it in with the priest. He's going to pray to God and make sure my harvest keeps coming in. Yeah, right? Don't forget, says Ibn Ezra, don't forget what I said to you about the harvest, that you leave some of it for the poor. Yeah, and they are going to come and be on your property. Yeah. Rashi is going to go farther and say, why else is this here? He's quoting Rabbi Avdimi ben Yosef. Why is this text about the leaving the gleanings on the corners of the field in between all the different festivals? And this section has Shavuot, it has Passover, it has Sukkot. Yeah. To teach you that everyone who leaves gleanings for the poor is rewarded as if he had built the temple and offered sacrifices there. Okay, so we did have ritual versus ethics, right? Give to the priest, give the omer to the priest, make sure you take care of the poor. Rashi, remember, is writing in a time when there's no temple. The temple's been destroyed. It's been 1,000 years, still waiting for the temple. If you leave gleanings, I know you're praying for the temple. Please return to Zion. Please rebuild God's holy house. If you give these gleanings to the poor, if you do what Boaz did, it is as if you personally built the temple and offered sacrifices there. So think about what that means for an exiled people, for a people in Galut, for people who don't have land, right? The Jews have been exiled from their land. We're right smack dab in the middle of exile, right? This idea of leaving for the poor and leaving the borders open for the poor is as if your reward is as if you personally put together a temple and offered sacrifices there. I will finish. I'm going to skip this. Leave them for the poor and the stranger. Let's see who could read for us. Rainey, we've got from Rabbi Levi ben Gerson, 14th century, and Ovadia Sforno, rabbi from the 16th century. Why don't you read these two together?
Leave them for the poor and for the stranger. Everything comes to us from God, who commanded that we use it to do good for the poor before any of it comes into our own hands. I am Adonai your God, God of the harvesters and God of the gleaners.
Okay, so thank you. And if you put these two things together, first of all, everything comes to us from God. You got a lot, you're fancy, you got rich, you got a lot of land, good for you. You might say, I built that. God is saying, the Torah is saying, you're not so fancy, you're just a renter. We're all renters here. Nobody's got this permanently. This is from God. Even if you are successful financially, it is all from God. So If God is the God of the harvesters, the people who have, and the God of the gleaners, the people who have to collect, don't think that there is such a separation, your separation of classes, the 1%. Is not so fancy. Same God. Y'all have the same God. You all are renters. This all belongs to God ultimately. What are you going to do with it? Is the pursuit of happiness to get and keep and hoard as much as you can? Or is the pursuit of happiness, holiness, taking that corner, which you could say is mine, all of it's mine, I grab all of it for me, and saying, actually, no, I let down my borders. I make sure that everyone who is created in God's image gets to have enough. And if I am the vehicle by which that happens, what an amazing blessing to be able to do that mitzvah. Ken Yehi Ratzon, it should be God's will that we take part in that mitzvah as well and set up a society in which everybody is able to pursue their own happiness because they've got enough. And we were, hopefully, God willing, vehicle for that to happen. "20 minutes. I did it."
Thank you.
Congratulations, Mazel tov.
To
Okay, Cantor Sarah.
Yashikoach to the rabbi.
Brachati. Thank you, Cantor.
So we're going to start with a little bit of singing. So I invite you, you're at home, so you can sing your lungs out, and no one except for your next door neighbors will hear. Here we go. I diddy die, diddy die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. I diddy die, diddy die, da 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 da, I diddy die, diddy die. Die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. I die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. That's the whole thing. Join in. I diddy die, diddy die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. I diddy die, diddy die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. Die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. Die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. I diddy die, diddy die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. I diddy die, diddy die, 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 I diddy die, diddy die. That's one of my favorite nigunim. And if we had, longer, we could keep singing, but we have 20 minutes, and so this is fittingly called Music at the Mountain. So we began with a song, but we're going to talk about a few other things too. So the full title of this is Music at the Mountain, Light and Sound, Speech and Silence. Music at the Mountain, Light and Sound, Speech and Silence. So standing at the foot of the mountain, the Israelites met God through a light show, a symphony of sounds and music, and a message. It was a feast of vibrations of all kinds. It was a miraculous light show where the lightning was actually heard and the thunder seen, where the music of the shofar woke the soul, where the utterances of the 10 Commandments entered the heart, and where we experienced silence. Each of these varieties of vibrations carried information, a communication from God to the people, a new message. And it carried this message also to the land where they stood. So for tonight, I wanted to create an experience of the 10 Commandments for us through music and speech and silence. Since we'd probably need to speed sing to fit 10 songs into our allotted time, I wondered if there was one song that could somehow encapsulate or connect in some way to all of the 10 commandments. So I began thinking about the Hebrew phrase for the 10 commandments, which is, does anybody know?
Aseret Dibros.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you have a sort of non-Ashkenazi accent, it's also called,
Aseret Dibrot.
yes, it's both. Perfect. Yeah, Aseret Dibrot, Aseret Dibros. So, another way to say it also is Aseret HaDevarim. I haven't heard that quite as often, but I know that some people use that expression as well. And it can be translated as, instead of 10 commandments, the 10 statements or the 10 utterances. So Aseret is 10, and then Dibrot, well, it's a little fuzzy exactly what it is, but it's definitely not mitzvot. It's definitely not commandments. But Dibrot is connected to the word devar, which means word or thing, as in devar Torah, which literally means a thing or a word of Torah. And so devar caught my attention. Words, speech. And I wondered, could the 10 commandments in some way be a speech about speech? So, in actuality, as the story is told with words and speech and sound, all of this was preceded by silence. The rabbis in the Midrash say that the Aseret Dibrot began not with a word, but with a message through silence. It was the silence of the first letter of the first word uttered, which was an aleph. The first word is Anochi, I am Adonai your God, an aleph. And all of nature was affected by the depth of the aleph, the silent letter. The Midrash says, Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, when the Holy Blessed One gave the Torah, no bird twittered. I mean, I didn't know they had Twitter back then, but apparently. No fowl flew, no ox lowed, none of the Ophanim stirred a wing. These are angels. The seraphim did not say, holy, holy, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. The sea did not roar. The creatures did not speak. Rather, the whole world was hushed into breathless silence, and the voice went forth, Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I am the Lord your God. So, in the spirit of the Aleph that began the Aseret Dibrot, I'd like to invite us, just for a few moments, to experience silence together. So if you'd like to, and I know some people feel very comfortable closing their eyes, and if you don't, that's fine too. But just sitting with your spine straight and your feet on the floor. This is also helpful to do right before we have a few hours of learning, just to clear our heads. And if you'd rather not close your eyes, you could just look down a bit towards the floor, maybe 45 degrees. And just take a couple of breaths. And just breathing in and breathing out. And feeling your body as the breath comes in and as the breath goes out. And relaxing your whole body. Feeling your feet on the floor. Relaxing your legs, your knees, your thighs. Feeling yourself sitting on the chair or whatever it is that you're sitting on. Relaxing your back. Relaxing your belly and your chest. Relaxing your shoulders. Relaxing your arms all the way down to your hands. And just feeling your hands. Relaxing your neck and your whole head, all the muscles of your face, your jaw, your eyes, and even imagining that your brain is like a muscle and you're just opening up the fist and letting it go. And just for a moment, tuning into the rhythm of your breath, feeling your breath coming in, your chest, your belly rising, and the breath coming out, your chest or your belly falling, and just watching 3 breaths, feeling the breath come in and go out, feeling your chest rise and fall. Aseret Dibrot, silence, and then a word. Light, sound, speech, and silence. As we recall in Genesis or Bereshit, from the silent, formless void, God said, "Let there be light." Yehi or, and there was light. And out of the silence, what can the words tell us? Just as the 10 Commandments, or the Aseret Dibrot, are some of the most influential and powerful words in the Western world and in parts of the East, our words too carry immense power and strength. Just as God in some inexplicable way uttered, or our tradition says, sang, for Torah trope was first heard, you guessed it, at the mountain. Just as God uttered the Aseret Dibrot, the 10 Commandments, for all present to hear, we as human beings are also wielding the gift of speech. And just as the Torah begins with the creation of the world through speech or vibration, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. We too create through our speech. Do we realize the power of our words? Dr. Susanna Heschel wrote of her father, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. She said, "Words create worlds," he used to tell me when I was a child. They must be used very carefully. Some words, once having been uttered, gain eternity and can never be withdrawn. The book of Proverbs reminds us, he wrote, that death and life are in the power of the tongue. And so perhaps God's famous speech, the 10 Commandments, can help us too become more aware of our words, more attuned to our words, more careful with our words. And that brings us to a song. Yai, lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. Ya, la, lai, lai, la, la, lai. Lai, 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 lai. La, lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. La, la, lai, lai, la, la, lai. Lai, la, lai, la, lai, lai. La, la, lai, lai, la, 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 lai, lai. Lai, la, lai, la, lai, lai. La, la, lai, lai, la, la, lai. Mi ha'ish, who is the person? Hechafetz chaim, who delights in life. Oh, heavy yamin, oh, heavy yamin, lirotov, and loves to see the good in his or her days. Mi hai hechafetz chaim. Who is the person who delights in life? Oh, heavy yamin. Oh, heavy yamin. Lirotov. And loves to see the good in their days. Nitzur lishon chameira. Guard your tongue from evil. Usfatacha midaber mirma. And your lips from harmful speech. Sur mirav asei tov. Depart from evil and do good. Bakesh shalom v'radfehu. Seek peace and pursue it. Mi haish hechafetz chaim. Oh, heavy yamin. Oh, heavy yamin. Alirato. Who is the person who desires life, who loves the days to see good in them? Guard your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking from harmful speech. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. Thank you for putting that in the chat. You can open your eyes if you'd like. So perhaps the 10 Commandments can help us to become more aware of our words, more attuned to our words, more careful with our words. So if you've studied with Wacky before, you'll know that there are several different ways to divide and count the 10 Commandments. But for now, I thought we could group some of them together and interpret them through the lens of speech. And I know we have about 5 minutes, and this was meant to be a discussion, and that might not happen, but I want to share with you how the 10 Commandments might be able to help guide our words. So it begins. God spoke all these words, saying, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, mibeit avadim. I, Adonai, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Lo yihi alecha Elohim acherim al panai, and you shall have no other gods besides me. So how might we fulfill this commandment through the power of our words? And I really wanted to open this up to everybody, but if you have an idea and you want to put it in the chat, please do. But here's an idea. In our daily prayers, we recall the miracle of the Exodus from Egypt. And in doing so, we open ourselves to the possibility of miracles happening for us and in our time through our words. Lo ta'aseh lechafasel. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Lo tishtachav elahem v'lo ta'ovdeim. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. So today, we can find ourselves worshiping idols, as in words, ideas, beliefs, or ideals, inflexible concepts set in stone. Do we put these above the people we love, or forget that we see just a small part of the mysterious whole? Lo tisa et shem Adonai Elohecha lashav. You shall not swear falsely by the name of Adonai your God. So today, do we make promises that we can keep and speak authentically with ourselves and with one another? Zechor v'achor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. Thank you for using the chat. Remember the Sabbath day. Oh, it didn't say that. It says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is in your settlements. And so today, do we guard Shabbat and keep it different and separate from the rest of the week by not speaking of money or business? Honor your father and your mother, that you may long endure on the land that Adonai your God is assigning to you. Do we care for our parents and elders with words of respect? We're almost there. We're almost at the 10. Lo tirtzach, lo tin'af, lo tignov, lo ta'aneh v'reacha et shaker. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And so today, do we protect ourselves and others by refraining from gossip? And lastly, Lo tachmod b'treyecha. You shall not covet your neighbor's house or anything that is your neighbor, that is your neighbor's. And so today, are we aware when we feel lacking and how that affects the way we speak to ourselves or about others? And I was planning to sing the song with you, but maybe we'll do that another time because I don't want to set things back. But thank you so much for participating and for everything that you put into the chat, and for doing this together tonight. So Chag Sameach.
Oh, thank
Oh,
you,
yeah.
Peter. That was wonderful. And who's next on the list?
Me.
Wacky, you're on.
Okay, so I'm so glad that you told the story about the silence. That was one of the midrashim I was going to read, and I put it aside for some other ones. So I'm glad I got in anyway. This story is called For the Sake of the Children. When was Moses coming down that mountain? Some people thought he must have died. How could anyone survive up there for so many days without food or water? Aaron, when is your brother Moses coming down from Mount Sinai? Asked Ruvain. Who will lead us out of the wilderness if he's dead? Said Devorah. Aaron, you must give the orders now. Your brother is not coming down. That's enough, screamed Aaron. My brother is not dead, do you hear me? He's not dead. Once God has given him the Torah, he will return to us. Yes, but when will that be? Said Leah. We can't wait here in the desert forever. Just then, a terrible clap of thunder erupted from the mountaintop. It echoed through the valley below and sent a chill through the Israelites waiting Moses' return. What was that? They screamed. The thunder rumbled again, and all the Israelites stopped screaming. They were too frightened even to open their mouths. They looked up to the mountain and saw Moses standing before them on a cliff. Moses, the people cried, you have returned to us. Show us God's Torah. Bring it down here for us to see. I have no Torah to show you, declared Moses. God heard your whining and your complaining. How could God entrust the Torah to you? I must give God something to prove that we're worthy of the honor of receiving God's teachings. Here, Moses, take my gold ring and silver coins. Take my emerald necklace, declared one woman. Soon all the Israelites were offering Moses their jewels that they had gotten from the Egyptians when they fled Egypt. Moses took the jewels and disappeared into the heights of Mount Sinai. This time, he was not gone for days. He was back very quickly. And he stood on the cliff with the jewels in his hand. God doesn't want your jewels. All your gold and silver are not worth God's Torah. Then ask God if he'll give us the Torah because of the deeds of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses returned to the mountaintop, and again he was quick to reappear before all the Israelites. The deeds of our ancestors are not enough, said Moses. What shall we do? Cried the people. What do we have that will convince God to entrust us with the Torah? Standing above the crowd, Moses could hear the mumbling of the people, trying to find a solution. He waited a long time. Finally, one woman approached him and said, Moses, our most precious possessions are our children. We will promise to teach the Torah to our children. We will raise them to love it and live by it. Ask God if that makes us worthy. Moses ascended the mountain, and just as before, he returned quickly. The people were anxious. They were nervous. Would God accept this last offer? Yes, said Moses. God has said that for the sake of the children, you will receive the Torah. Now you must teach it to them so that they will inscribe it upon their hearts and their minds and their souls. Moses placed the Torah in its very special ark, and from that day on, the Torah has gone wherever we have gone, and it still rests in its own special ark, our holy ark. Next.
I think it's me. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk today about queer reading of Megillat Ruth, or in other words, I will try to read the Megillah from a queer perspective. Yesterday, I talked to my mom, and told her about today and the subject that I'm going to talk about, and she asked me, what does the word queer means? She said, it sounds familiar. I knew what it was, but I forgot. So queer, literally, it means odd, strange, unusual, you probably know. But at the end of the 19th century, it started being used as a slur for gay people because their sexuality was unusual, probably. And the word had a bad connotation, and it still does for many people, especially the older among us, against whom this word was used as a curse. Only in the late 1980s, with the development of the gay rights movement, LGBT activists began to reclaim the word and use it as a word of pride. Pride in being gay, pride in being LGBT, pride in being who we are. So in a way, queer is another word for LGBT or LGBTQ, where Q means queer or questioning gender, questioning sexuality. But I think it's much more than that. It represents a wider range of people than just LGBT. Perhaps anything unusual on the spectrum of gender and or sexuality. Different people defines the word queer differently. Some would say it's an umbrella term to describe individuals who don't identify as straight. Others may tell you it represents those who exist outside of what society mandates, including but not limited to gender and sexuality. The reason I like to use this word to describe identities, including mine, is because it's not specific, it's open, and many identities are. In January this year, 2 months before another Israeli election, Merav Michaeli was elected to be the leader of the Israeli Labor Party. She is only the third woman leader in the history of the party that was established in 1968. A few days later, when parties started talking to each other about potential merges, she publicly stated, I and Ofer Shelach are talking. Ofer Shelach was a male leader of another party. But when you say something like that in Hebrew, we are talking, you can't stay gender neutral, usually. And when Merav Michaeli said that, she used the feminine form in plural, אנחנו מדברות. Usually in Hebrew, people use the feminine form in plural when the subject of the sentence is women only, and sometimes not even then. The masculine form, אנחנו מדברים, is a default. It's even used as neutral. So when somebody speaks in feminine and refers not to women only, it's very obvious. It sounds weird, it sounds wrong, and people start to feel uncomfortable and freak out, and they did. When Meirav Michaeli said, אנחנו מדברות, people, men and women, criticized her and made fun of her. She was an object of preposterous imitations in the media. Some complained that while a big chunk of the population had to fight for a livelihood during the pandemic, she fights to change the Hebrew language instead of putting her energy into important things. Basically, the country had an earthquake. Using feminine in plural, I don't think Meirav Michaeli tried to say that Ofer Shelach, the man she was talking about, is a woman or queer. She didn't try to say anything about him. What she was trying to do is make women present. And she has been doing that using feminine and bigender verbs for almost 20 years, which I would say is a queer act by itself. And not just her. There are individuals and communities in Israel who live inside a multi-gender language for 20 years at least. Feminists who attempt to emphasize the existence of women that language and society forget. Queer people who try to find better way to express themselves in a language that is restricted to two genders only. So now let's talk about Megillat Ruth finally. So reading in Megillat Ruth shows that this type of discourse is not necessarily a modern invention. In Ruth 1:19, after years of exile in Moab, where her husband and sons died, Naomi returns to Israel with her daughter-in-law Ruth. And I'm quoting, "When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them," says the English translation of the text, and continues. "And the women said, 'Can this be Naomi?'" But the word women does not exist in the Hebrew original. If I were to translate this verse literally, it would probably be, "When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them and said, 'Can this be Naomi?'" But when I translate it like that, it's missing the gendered verbs, which Rabbi Mike mentioned today earlier. They said in the Hebrew, vetomarna is conjugated in feminine. And because it's conjugated in feminine, it sounds unusual, weird, same as Meirav Michaeli sounded back in January. The English translation or translator is not sure how to react to this weirdness. They're so confused by it that they make an assumption that the audience who welcomed Naomi and Ruth into town were women only. Since they can't translate the verb in its uniqueness, they add a subject to the sentence, women. A subject that helps them understand why the Hebrew verb is conjugated the way it is. But it's not just the translation that assumed that. Midrash Lekach Tov explicitly states that since the verb vetomarna is in plural feminine, only women welcomed Naomi and Ruth upon their arrival. That's simple. I think it's the simplistic way to go, the easy way to see things. On the contrary, if the text states the whole city said, it's very likely that men were present. Is it really easier to believe that the biblical writer strangely omitted the subject of the sentence, women, than to consider they were using gender non-conforming language? perhaps as part of the message of the whole story? This story is one of the few stories in the Bible, I believe, that is built around women protagonists. The story breaks norms not only by being built around women, also since the woman Ruth is the one who chooses the man with whom she wants to marry. She is the one who does the move to get him, an action that was not common or even acceptable at that time. With that in mind, it shouldn't be illogical to assume that the writer used the language as well to empower women's presence and importance. Now let's try to go a step forward. In the next verse, Ruth 1:20, after the whole town welcomed her and Ruth, Naomi replies, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter." Shaddai refers to God, and Mara means bitter. So the common interpretation of this verse is, don't call me Naomi, call me bitter, because God made my life bitter. Another meaning of the word Shaddai is my breasts, which aligns with one of the known meanings of the biblical Shaddai, the god of fertility. Would it be too wild to assume that what Naomi actually says is, my breasts made my life bitter? Does she not like her breasts and her name anymore, and instead of Naomi, she wants to be called Mara? Mara is an unusual form of mal in Hebrew, bitter. It's not spelled the way a feminine word is normally spelled in Hebrew, with a hey at the end. Instead, it ends with an aleph, which doesn't fall into normal Hebrew patterns of masculine or feminine. So is it something else? A queer variation of the word, maybe? Perhaps I'm going too far, but a spark of non-binary gender is definitely expressed here. The story focuses on women and their power, but it takes another step and illuminates the non-binary human existence. The heart of this verse, I believe, is the change Naomi went through, an identity change, a gender-related change that is supported by queer language and grammar. She went through tough times, hunger, exile, death, and loss. And now she's back, stronger. Her identity crisis, losing her family in a foreign country, makes her go back to her origin, to Israel. The tough journey that made her bitter, Mara, strengthened her national identity, but also her gender identity. She's a woman in a patriarchal society who returns to her country and breaks gender norms. Right, she has a motive to create a better life for Ruth and for herself, but she approaches it in a queer way. She is the power behind Ruth's plan to marry Boaz, a pretty non-normative plan from a gender and sexuality perspective, especially at that time. Unfortunately, the end of the Megillah is disappointing from a gender perspective, I think. The last few verses, Ruth 4:18 to 22, are dedicated to a long ancestry leading to King David's birth. From Peretz through Boaz and Ovad, his and Ruthan, to Ishai and David. Ruth, Naomi, or any other women are not mentioned. The women who came to Israel turned their hopeless and bitter reality into successful life and founded the future of the Israeli nation as the mothers of King David do not get any credit. But although most of the time we live in a male-dominant culture, the other perspectives are there. Naomi and Ruth are there. Meirav Michaeli is there. Her non-normative gender language is being noticed by the mainstream only 20 years later, but she's there. And so are many others. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have for questions.
Great.
if anybody has anything they want to say or ask.
I got a question.
Yeah.
The female plural, is that kind of analogous to the word they that we might use these days?
Do you mean they in English for gender
Yes.
neutral?
Yes, which is used occasionally for, I guess, transgender.
Yeah, yeah. So can you repeat the question? Because
So you were talking about the plural female subject, which is unusual, and
so
sometimes people call themselves they, and that's unusual for many people. I have a hard time getting used to that. And I don't always understand it. So is it analogous to that, what you're talking about?
I think it's an attempt, yeah, because Hebrew doesn't have that, doesn't have the they. You can't say they without gender. So if you use, I think people who use both conjugations in plural or singular, feminine and masculine, it's a way to express your non-binary. And I think it's one of the reason. I mean, the Knesset member that I mentioned, I think she does it from a women feminist perspective, but other or transgender or non-binary people would use it as maybe a parallel to the they in English. Yeah.
So she uses it for a different reason, though. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Would you say she was using it in order to center herself as the person who was kind of beginning the conversation, right? The person who has like the volition or the will that is creating the conversation she's having with a man. And the fact that she's having that conversation with a man is not dictating how she's going to express that in the language.
Exactly.
Rather, it's coming from her being the one who's like having the conversation as a woman.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to say that. Yeah.
There's also there's a I can't think of the word. Predecessor is not the word. There's precedent. There's a precedent for that. In Numbers 12, when Miriam and Aaron complain about Moses's Cushite wife, you familiar with this story? If you look at the beginning of Numbers, it's Vatidaber Miriam va'Aharon. That Miriam and Aaron spoke, but Vatidaber is like a singular feminine, right? So it's like, and actually the rabbis take a look at that and they're like, oh, Miriam was really leading the charge, like she was the one who was doing most of the speaking. But it's literally, it's Miriam and Aaron, she said, right? It's hard to translate into English, but so that does happen every once in a while, or at least it happens there.
Yeah, it's there, here and there. Yeah. Thank you for letting me.
Thank you. Really, really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you, Ronnie. Who's next after Ronnie?
Michael Bialis.
Trying to unmute myself here. What? But you have to bring up the.
He's got a hat. He means business.
So I'll be singing two songs tonight that I wrote. I want to thank Rabbi Mike for improving my first song with a suggestion which resulted in me writing a bridge verse that made the song both narratively and musically richer. He also suggested the title Voices on the Wind, which is more lyrical and evocative than the original title that I had. Before I introduce my first song, I want you to know that I consider myself a better songwriter than an arranger or performer, and probably primarily a lyricist. One of the few times that I performed in front of an audience, my hands started shaking so much that halfway through I couldn't play my guitar anymore. So if at some point I start singing a cappella, that's why. An early Rolling Stones song said, "It's the singer, not the song," though that sentiment must appear somewhere in the Tanakh. I hope that you can reverse this notion by listening to the song and not so much the singer. My comments tonight don't reference Ruth, but the rabbi's comments were entirely in line with the direction that my comments go. In Genesis, when Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" it is a question that he poses in order to deny such responsibility. But the curious thing is that his question resonates through time, even to the present, because our natural human response is to say, "Yes, I am my brother's keeper," or at least should be. Indeed, as Jews, we are charged with this responsibility in Genesis when God says, "I have known Abraham in order that he may charge his sons and his household after them to keep the way of Adonai, to do what is right and just in the world." We often fall short of this ideal, but there are also Jews who not only fall short, but who actively defile God's commandments to do justice. My first song focuses on one such Jew who tramples one of the most often mentioned exhortations in the Torah, to be kind and just to the stranger. Though this particular Jew is thankfully no longer near the center of power in our country, he could be in the future, and in any event, he can still cause trouble. Though my song focuses on him, I hope you understand that he is not the only instance of such a Jew. And please do not interpret my song as excusing such abhorrent behavior in non-Jews. There are two Yiddish words in this song. Most people are familiar with shanda, meaning shame. The other Yiddish word is farter, which means traitor. Because the internet connection seems a little unreliable, I'm going to put up the words to the song, but try not to read ahead and try and listen as much as you can. Sometimes when you read, you don't hear at the same time that you read. So the first song is Voices on the Wind. Yeah. Trying to get it up here, 1 second. And then I can just scroll down for the next one, right? Scroll up, I mean.
And if people want to, you could do the side-by-side mode, and that way you can see the words and Michael.
Okay, Voices on the Wind. You can leave if you want. Stephen Miller is a hater, proud and cruel as he can be. Stephen, whoops, sorry. This is my non-professionalism again. I meant to be reading off another sheet where I have the chords, because even though I wrote the song, I often forget the words and the chords. Let me try again. Take two. Stephen Miller is a hater, proud and cruel as he can be. Stephen Miller is a killer of people longing to be free. Listen, Stephen, listen, there are voices on the wind. The voices of your great-grandparents whispering, Stephen, it's a sin. Shonda, Stephen, Shonda, America, let us in. Shonda, Stephen, Shonda, weep the voices on the wind. Stephen Miller thrills in tearing children from their parents' arms. Sneers no justice, no mercy for those who flee from wanton harm. Listen, Stephen, listen, other voices in the night. Shout though you hate like we do. You're not truly white. Jews will not replace us. How voices in the night. Stephen, your disgraces still won't make them call you white. Stephen Miller, just remember, these friends of yours are vile. Though your hate may now protect you, that will only last a while. Listen, Stephen, listen, as the voices in the night shout, though you think you're one of us, in our eyes you're still not white. Jews will not replace us. How voices while the wind weeps. Stephen, you disgrace us. You would not have let us in. From both sides of the border and all across the land, voices rising on the wind plead, please understand. I didn't want to leave my home, my life was forfeit there. My child was threatened by the gangs, there was nothing but despair. Listen to our voices, though they sound strange to your ear. We say the same things your kin said when they were coming here. I want to work, I want to eat, I want my child to live. Let me help your country thrive, give me a chance to give. God said treat the stranger kindly, you were strangers in strange lands. Stephen, how can you so blindly dishonor God's own commands? Listen, Stephen, listen, cry voices on the wind. The lie of white supremacy killed 6 million of your kin. Shonda, Stephen, Shonda, never again. Shonda, Stephen, Shonda, weep the voices on the wind. Jews will not his voices in the night. Shonda, Stephen, Shonda, weep voices on the wind. Shonda, Stephen, Shonda, let the immigrants come in. Shonda, Stephen, Shonda, sigh voices on the wind. Hear the voices sighing, let them in, let them in. Shonda, Varter, Shonda, let them in, let them in. Hear the voices crying, let them in.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Bravo. Gil Oak would be proud of
See
you.
what the chat says.
What?
No, scroll down. Oh, well, not yet.
Oh.
No,
Stop it.
all right, scroll back down. Okay. I have a few more comments if I can find them. Regarding this song, at the time of Charlottesville, I did not understand the exact import of the phrase, Jews will not replace us. This slogan is an expression of what is known as replacement theory, or the Great Replacement, a white nationalist conspiracy theory which states that intentional policies advanced by global and liberal elites are demographically and culturally replacing European people and culture with non-European people and non-European cultures. Though not all people subscribing to this notion are anti-Semitic, many are. This is especially true in America, where adherents feel that white jobs and white culture are being threatened by Blacks and other people of color, since in their minds, people of color, especially Blacks, are inferior to whites. This can only be explained if some other clever group is masterminding a conspiracy. It must be the internationalist Jews who are conspiring to replace white Christians in their culture. Thus the chant, "Jews will not replace us." Also, related to the song, I would like to say that though President Biden has abandoned the previous administration's use of intentional cruelty and bigotry as part of their immigration policy and is improving the situation at the border, immigration still requires our attention and our help because of the ongoing human suffering and because of the changes that need to be made to US laws and policies. If you want to learn more, next Wednesday, May 19th at 7 p.m., NASA is sponsoring a Zoom presentation
Louis Mintz.
titled Modern Day
Michael Phil Oaks is very proud.
featuring speaker Emma Tobin, who is the Chief Program Officer for the International Institute of New England. You can find the Zoom link in the Starlight. Now, moving on to my next song. In addition to commanding us to be kind and just to the stranger, the Tanakh has other directives concerning being our brothers, and I might add, sisters and cousins, keepers. For example, Isaiah says, "Is not the fast that I desire, the unlocking of the chains of wickedness, the loosening of exploitation, the freeing of the oppressed, the breaking of the yoke of servitude? Is it not sharing of your bread with those who starve, the bringing of the wretched poor into your house, or clothing someone you see who is naked and not hiding from your fellow human being in their time of need? But who among us has not been or will not be at some point needing the help of others? We all relied on others when we were children. However, it not only takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to aid the poor, the disadvantaged, the disabled, the elderly, basically all of us at some point in our lives. My next song is a very personal song evoking the question of being your brother's, sister's, or cousin's keeper. Though this song is very specific and personal, it is also about millions of people and millions of families.
Michael, did you want to share a different screen or you?
Oh, you can see this one that says, "Who will take care of my son?" Right?
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Right? You see that?
Yes.
Yeah, we see it fine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's the second song. Oh, 1 second. I held my son when he was born. Did you hold your child too? They said that he may never walk. Did they say that to you? They said that he may never talk. I held him tighter still and promised I would stand by him even through the gates of hell. Sometimes I held him wondering when would his seizure end. 100 times I held him when they put a needle in. I held him when he could not sleep. How can I begin to spit out all the days and ways I was there for him? With joys and pain, years come and go. There's always something new. But this time something's coming, and there's nothing I can do. Each time I pass a looking glass, I'm troubled now to see the graying face of an old man looking back at me. My son will not understand when I'm no longer here. Will he wonder where I've gone and why I don't appear? And when I'm gone, will those who fight to cut his safety net finally win and leave no means for his needs to be met? I stood by him these many years like I promised to. But what will become of him when my days are through? Who will take care of my son when I'm gone? Will you take care of my son when I'm gone? Who will take care of my son when I'm gone? Will you take care of my son? Please take care of my son. Thank you. That is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them.
Awesome.
Michael, you put so much heart into your songs. I don't know how you do it song after song.
Well, I do have some silly songs too. But I appreciate that.
It's just so powerful and so open in terms of opening your heart and your fears, but also it helps us all, I think, just realize what astounding love the two of you have for him, and what it and the degree of the giving that each of you individually and the two of you together have done. But to then put it onto a song that it's just, sorry, it's just so moving. You don't have to respond. I'm just making the observation. You know,
I appreciate your
airing,
because I know you know us.
I think. Well, I just feel. It may sound weird, just in a way, very fortunate to have, for us, those of us who were participating tonight, to be able to have this, if I can put it this way, this gift that you're giving to us about compassion. I'm sorry.
I would echo that, Rabbi Mintz. Well said. And thank you for, I just had to catch my breath there for a couple minutes because that was really, really special, Michael. Thank you for personalizing it. You know, when we talk about what does it mean to have a just world and Jewish justice, and people, wow, there they go, talking about politics again. Why do they always got to talk politics? And when we're talking about politics, we're talking about Adam. We're talking about what does it mean to have a society where Torah's values that you so beautifully mentioned from Isaiah are lived out, and where the people who take care of it. I mean, you guys took him in again during COVID because, you know, it was dangerous to be in his home where he's back now, thank God. But who works there? Who are those people who keep Adam going? They're the immigrants that we've been talking about. They're, you know, Isaac and all the folks who work there. I mean, so it's not, you know, some abstract concept of politics. It's Adam and you and Sarah. And thank you for bringing it alive for us. I'm just very moved by that. I didn't know you were going to pull out. So I'm a little verklempt. So thank you.
I could do more than one.
Michael, you're going to be a hard act to follow.
I get that job.
Congratulations.
Before God offered the Torah to the people of Israel, he offered it to a lot of other nations. When he offered it to the people of Edom, they asked, what does the Torah say? You shall not murder, God replied. But we are men of war who live by the sword, they said. We cannot accept the Torah. God offered the Torah to the people of Ishmael. They said, what's written in it? You shall not steal. Oh, but we're traders who are not always honest in our business dealings. We cannot accept the Torah. So God went to the other nations and each of them refused the Torah. Then he came to the people of Israel. Will you accept my Torah, he offered. What is written in it, they asked. There are 613 laws and rules. All that you say we will do and we will obey, they answered.
Rainey.
Here I am.
There you are.
Ready for me?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share a link in the chat that will have a PDF of my little presentation I put together because I'm not going to probably go over every single thing in it. But now I'm going to share my screen and try to figure this out. All right, everybody see it? Is my presentation up there? All right.
Yep.
I've only ever screen shared once before, so this is very bizarre to me. So I'm very thankful that Rabbi Mike suggested that I do something related to the tarot, because if I had even thought of this myself, I would have just said, oh, everyone will think I'm crazy. But this way, if everyone thinks I'm crazy, I have the blessing of the rabbi, ha ha ha. So I'm going to talk a little bit about tarot cards, actually, and how there is very likely a connection between them and the Torah. And I will try to condense this in my allotted time. Like I said, there are some things that I'm not going to necessarily go over in my little thing I put together here. So basically, if you are not familiar, what is the tarot and where the heck did it come from? So it's a deck of cards, right? The tarot is generally 78 cards, and people read these cards sometimes just for their own introspective purposes, or divination, and or for fun. I would put myself mostly into the introspection category, but I do think that there's a lot of magic to them in a way, and it's also very fun. So I think all of those things kind of have their place. There's a ton of different tarot decks that are available all over the world. I probably have 10 to 12 different ones because I love the art in a lot of different ones. But the most famous one is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which is the photo there. You may have seen that one before. Pops up at Barnes and Noble. It's all over. It's been around for a very long time. And as far as how it developed and where it came from, we know a lot about the development of the tarot since about the 15th century throughout Europe and especially in Italy. But there's a lot of questions about the true kind of meaning behind some of these images and where they originated and who may have done that, the creation of them. So I'm going to dig a little bit into that. So the major arcana is what I'm going to be focusing on, and the major arcana are the 22 key number, 22 cards that are considered the most important. So these have singular names like the Empress or the Tower or Judgment, and they're considered to be sort of these archetypes that have a weighty impact if you do a tarot reading. So there's a difference between pulling the Tower and pulling the Three of Cups, right? They're these sort of big, heavy cards that have a lot of meaning. The minor arcana are 56 cards divided into 4 suits, just like regular playing cards. So there's an ace, a 2 through 10, and then the court cards, which are typically a page, knight, queen, and king, although there's some variation there. And the similarities between that system and regular playing cards is not coincidental. It's believed that the major arcana sort of developed in one place, and the minor arcana may have been tacked on later and actually developed from a regular card game. So these two things didn't necessarily always exist side by side. And some people do actually read regular playing cards as you would tarot cards. Okay, but how spooky is it, right? Like, isn't this evil? Isn't this some sort of like demonic, horrible, bad thing that we're not supposed to talk about? This is not my image, although it's I love the lighting in it. I just thought it was very spooky, so I chose that one. My short answer is no, it's not inherently spooky. A lot of different people and groups of people may use these things, but at the end of the day, it's a deck of cards, right? And there's a lot of possible answers to this. So here's a little side by side to think about what that really means. Like, is something evil or bad? Some things generally considered not spooky. Prayer or davening aloud or silently. Lighting candles in a socially acceptable location. Wearing mainstream garb of a mainstream religion. Belief in a god or gods. The moon's effect on ocean tides. Death. Things generally considered spooky. Talking to yourself. Lighting candles in the woods. Wearing a mysterious cloak. Belief in ghosts. Thinking the moon could possibly have an effect on literally anything other than the tides. Death. So it all depends on what lens you're looking through and how you're viewing this. So, all right, what does the Torah have to do with this? Did the major arcana originate from it? Short answers, potentially a lot and maybe. I am in the camp that believes that these two things are inextricably linked from the point of the Kabbalah, and that the roots of those original 22 archetypes and images were taken from the story of Genesis and the creation story and some ideas surrounding it. So I will now attempt to summarize this. And yes, that is my favorite selfie at the bottom there. So in many decks, the 22 major arcana feature the 22 Hebrew letter numbers. The reason I say letter numbers is because if you're familiar with the concept of gematria, sort of Jewish and Kabbalistic numerology, each letter is also a number. It has a numerical value. So within this idea, this thinking, we don't separate those two things. So that means that each card that corresponds to a letter has a number. It has a gematric significance. So remember, this is similar to something that Cantor Sarah mentioned earlier. These letter numbers are believed in Kabbalah to have actually created everything. So God spoke them and they became planets. They became the days of the week. They became body parts. And this is outlined in the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Formation, which is a key Kabbalistic text. Very, very old. It's generally ascribed potentially to Abraham, as in Abraham, and people believe that he may have been the one to dictate this or track it down. Also, some people say possibly Rabbi Akiva. I don't know. I wasn't there. So the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn is often considered responsible for putting these two things together, the alphabet letters and the tarot cards. but they basically appropriated everything. So this is a Western sort of secret group of magicians and, you know, these spooky people. And they didn't just get this idea from nowhere. None of them really spoke Hebrew, or a few of them may have known a little bit of scholarly Hebrew, but they weren't Jewish. This was not, it was not a Jewish system that just became the Golden Dawn, right? These people appropriated a lot of these ideas. So if these ideas were originally Jewish and originally just from the Kabbalah, why don't we know that, right? What happened? Probably anti-Semitism, honestly. A little bit more about the Golden Dawn. Aleister Crowley was one. He was a famous racist and anti-Semite and magician. There's a lot to go into there that I cannot grab right now. They're responsible kind of for the westernization of the Kabbalah that sort of forgot about its roots. And now we sort of know it as this, you know, religion or spirituality of a lot of celebrities. And a lot of people don't even realize the Jewish connection there, that it is a Jewish mysticism. And supposedly the Golden Dawn applied a lot of information from the Suffragettes era. However, they made all these arbitrary changes to it that I absolutely cannot get into right now, but they just sort of did whatever they wanted. They moved letters around, they moved correspondences around, and there doesn't seem to be much of a reason for that. You could argue, well, maybe they knew all the real secrets, right? And they're a secret group, so they're hiding them. I doubt that's it. I think it has more to do with kind of arrogance, appropriation, and trying to own this mystical idea and mysticism. So in the Major Arcana, there's these 22 cards. They have all these archetypical ideas on them, and it's widely accepted by pretty much anyone who uses tarot cards that they represent the fool's journey. So it's kind of like a hero's journey in like a literary context. There's also a lot of connection to the creation story. So many people say, no, this is really the story of Genesis, and you can find it in these cards. I'm one of those people who fall into that camp. And the order of the cards in this graphic, if you're familiar with the tarot at all, you may notice that this is a different order of the cards. You may have to revisit this later as I move on. But basically, this order was done through a person who based his work on this Kabbalist and philosopher Carlos Suarez, who basically fixed a lot of correspondences the Golden Dawn screwed up. So he went back to the Suffragettes era and said, no, they changed where the planets go and they changed where the elements go, so this should be the order of it. So this order is important, and I'll kind of try to explain why. I'm going to stop for a second and show some overt Torah imagery in the majors. If you're ever looking at a tarot deck, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, here's some things that really should stand out. The High Priestess, she corresponds to the letter Tav and to the moon as her planet, even though it's not really a planet, it's a celestial body. So she's holding a Torah scroll, like she's holding the Torah, and she's sitting between the columns of Boaz and Yakin, the columns of King Solomon's temple, right? In the Temperance card, if you look up near the angel's neckline, it's believed that this could be the angel Michael. I put archangel in quotes because that's obviously not what he's called really within Judaism, but he's the only one of these more important angels mentioned in the Jewish, Christian, and other traditions. So he's kind of the big guy. If you look up near the neckline of his robe, it says, it's got the tetragrammaton, so the Yod He Vav He, the name of God that we don't pronounce. We move over to the Wheel of Fortune. Here's a really big one. First of all, look at the wheel. We've got the Yod He Vav He there again, Adonai. If we look at just the letters, the other, I almost said Roman letters, you know, the Roman alphabet letters that we use. Also, there's the argument is always that it says rota, which means wheel in Italian, since the tarot, you know, kind of came through Italy and did a lot of its developing there. But if you start with the T and go in one direction, if you go clockwise, it says tarot. And if you go right to left or counterclockwise, the way we would with Hebrew, it arguably just says Torah. And around the corners there, we've got the man, eagle, ox, and lion who were seen in Ezekiel's vision. So a lot to unpack there. Again, you may want to revisit this later, and I can try to connect some of these dots. My 10-minute reminder just beeped at me, so I will try to wrap up in 5. Let's see, my enter key doesn't want to work. There we go. Okay, so this is where I might lose some people down the rabbit hole, but I will try to make this clear. So this section right here is just some ponderings of my own. So This doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just something that I think about and I think is kind of interesting. So the book of Genesis has 50 verses, at least the way we know it now. I don't know enough to know if that ever changed or was different or if there was any readjustment there, but as it stands, there are 50 verses. If we were to assign the major arcana, so these 22 cards, to the verses based on their numerical values, to their gematria values, we would travel from Aleph, which corresponds to number 1, the Fool, the element of air, when God creates the sky and the air and everything out of nothing, to Nun, 50, or death, where Jacob dies, right? So my cat's just knocked something very loud over. Hopefully you didn't hear that. So to me, the cards 1 through 14, the Fool to death, are the book of Genesis, right? We move on to Temperance, which is the next card in the order. And there's always seemed to be a natural termination after the death card. That may seem obvious, but I believe that the rest of those cards tell a slightly different story. So if you look at Temperance, where we've got this potential Michael angel, he's got 1 foot on the land and 1 foot on the water, which is very symbolic of a transition when we're looking at the art, right? So there's some sort of transition from life on Earth to whatever might be next. Is this the beginning of a new story? I don't know. So with those additional ponderings, I am not going to go into this whole ridiculous chart. This is here for you if you're wondering what I do when I'm up way too late at night. What I did is put these letters that would correspond to those verses 1 through 50 in this little chart, and I just sort of put what's happening there, right? Is there any correspondence? Does this make any sense? Have I been drinking too much caffeine? Not really. I don't drink caffeine. I'm just crazy. So I tried to kind of put these ideas together just to sort of look at them, right? And you will notice that it goes 9, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. That is how those gematria values go. So for example, in order to have 11, you'd need to have Yud Aleph or some other combination. So that's just kind of how the gematria works. There's no like letter that corresponds to 11. So that's why there's no, well, what is verse 11, right? So here's a little further reading if you like pina coladas and rabbit holes.
Those would be chapters, just
chapters. Yes. Thank you. I knew I had to go back and fix something. Chapters, not verses.
Right.
Yeah, many, many verses. So Carlos Suarez, who I mentioned briefly earlier, was a Kabbalist and author and philosopher and artist who basically believed that the entire Torah was written in an actual code based on these sacred Hebrew letters. I am not saying that I necessarily like believe that this is all the case and this is true. It's just very interesting. If we think there's meaning and some sacredness and some magic to these letters, it's very interesting to kind of read this idea in this way. So his theory is that you can't even understand the Torah at the surface level by reading the words. You have to look at the letter value. So he inspired the work of this person I've actually come to be friends with over the past year who made Psyche.com, which is where I sort of got into this revived order of the tarot majors, which fixed all the Sefer Yetzirah mess that the Golden Dawn did, right? So there's a lot there. This book, Cipher of Genesis, is very difficult to read. It's bonkers, but it's very interesting if you like to just kind of get philosophical about this stuff. So it's also obviously worth checking out the Sefer Yetzirah itself, especially the short, long, or Sadia versions. The Ari Gra version is very well known, so you might hear about that or see that, but it is kind of believed that that version was just changed to match the Zohar when the Zohar was sort of came on the scene. So I tend to look at, well, what's older rather than what showed up later and what seems to be an altered version that's different from all the other 3 things. A lot of people look at the Zohar as the primary book of Kabbalah, that the Zohar is sort of the foundational text. I would argue, because I have maybe read too much Carlos Suarez, that the 3 most essential texts of Kabbalah are the Book of Genesis, Song of Songs, and the Sefer Yetzirah. So there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of late night conversations possible there. But some questions to think about. If the major arcana that became what we know in the tarot do have ancient roots in Kabbalah and the Torah, is tarot's gradual rebranding as evil in and of itself anti-Semitic? I don't know. Most people who are, mainstream tarot users would never make this connection and might completely ignore the fact that there's Hebrew on the cards. Arguably, There's Hebrew on the cards because Pamela Coleman Smith, who painted them, and Arthur Edward Waite, who kind of instructed her as what to do, were members of the Golden Dawn. But that idea came from somewhere, right? The Golden Dawn didn't just wake up one day and said, hey, Hebrew, yes, let's just magically connect these things with no precedent whatsoever. They obviously took these ideas from somewhere, right? If it's not being used for divination in a way that supersedes the Torah, is there any reason to believe that the tarot's use is actually prohibited, right? At the end of the day, it is an inanimate object, and there's a lot of different things that we can do with ideas and concepts represented by art. The tarot's earliest known origins that are kind of established are in 15th century Europe, around the time that the Jews were booted out of Spain, and many ended up in Italy, which is a key player in the tarot story. If the theory of Kabbalistic and Jewish roots is true, does it not make some sense that this fact would be intentionally obscured? And if so, by whom? I don't suspect the Inquisition. So there's a lot to think about. There's a lot of information, and there's a lot of different rabbit holes branching off of here. But basically, if these images and these archetypes originally came through, thinkers that knew the Torah, and they were trying to transmit ideas through physical, visual representations, at what point would people say, okay, that's not Jewish anymore, right? I don't know. I think it's very interesting, and I think there's a lot to unpack there, and I still have a lot to study and learn, which brings me to, if you have questions, which I may or may not be able to answer, I can potentially at least point you in a functional direction for that. So I think I've got about 3 minutes on this or so. So I'm going to close that and unshare. Am I unshared? Good.
Yes, you unshare.
Beautiful.
I'm going to out myself as a little bit of a nerd here, but it turns out that there's other cards that have biblical imagery. There's the Ace of Wands, which is specifically a hand holding a staff, which has is flowering, which if you're familiar with the Torah, specifically, if I'm not mistaken, Aaron has a staff that magically flowers almond blossoms. Yep, there it is. So it's really interesting stuff. I mean, there's a lot there. If people who are familiar with biblical images, it's very hard to look at these cards and not see a lot of kind of the images that it seems like to some degree were derived from the Torah.
Right. Yeah, sorry.
It's also my understanding that people used to use tarot cards for just playing card games. So they had a non,
Yeah, I think a lot of that was potentially also the minor arcana primarily. But so basically the tarot as we know it has been used to play card games, and regular playing cards as we know them have been used to divine, right? So there's definitely been overlap, and that makes it a little bit confusing when we're trying to find all the origins of it. There's a lot of entire books about this, and I found some information that says, well, there were these really old, there was a Chinese game that was based on gambling, and they started using cards instead of physical objects, and that looks like what became the suit of wands and the suit of discs, right? But I think my biggest curiosity is just the major arcana itself, since it does seem like it is what potentially had more meaning kind of put into it. So
very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, there was actually one thing I meant to mention was I cannot for the life of me remember who said this and where I saw it, but I did hear a quote once that said basically, if you have a deck of tarot cards, which meant the major arcana in that context, if you have a deck, you don't need your Bible, or could have also meant Torah. I just said Bible, but that it's supposed to have all the possible information and everything that could possibly relate to the human condition and the universe represented there. And I really wish I could find that, because I bet there was some more kind of cool content around it, but I'll have to look.
Wow. How did you get interested in this?
See, Leslie Schroeder had a question.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say that I really appreciated the thought about making it not have Jewish beginnings, because I think the root of much Christianity also forgets that it had Jewish beginnings, and it's just an interesting it's just a really interesting thought. And I also appreciated all of the tarot work, but that just really struck me. And thank you for that. It was very, very interesting.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's, as far as anything Kabbalistic goes, a lot of people think that if you're not Jewish and you're even learning about it, you yourself are automatically appropriating. And so I'm not Jewish on paper, right? I'm trying to approach this through what I think is an appropriate and respectful lens, where I'm not interested particularly in what has been westernized from it. And in a lot of decks, just one note that goes with that is the Hierophant. In this deck, he's sort of the authoritative figure. He's often the Pope or the High Priest in a lot of decks. So a lot of things within this were Christianized. But the traditional name is the Hierophant. So thank you.
So I think Matt's question is interesting. I'll say real quickly though, the idea of a game having a deeper meaning, I think we're very familiar with dreidels, right? In which it looks like a game and there's a secret message there, Neskadol Hayasham or Neskadol Hayapo, a great miracle happened there. And there is theories that it was to keep the idea of telling the Hanukkah story away from the Roman authorities or the Babylonian authorities, depending on who was the bad guy at the time. The other thing is that the word cabal, like a secret band of troublemakers, it's right from Kabbalah or Kabbalah. So the idea that this would be something that to your point that this could be there could be some anti-Semitism around. It's not. I don't think that's so far-fetched. More research needed. Yeah.
Yeah, and we know, it was a fact that it wasn't just a product of their time type thing, but a lot of members of the Golden Dawn, especially Crowley, were just horrible, racist, anti-Semite. I mean, I've read some of this, and it's not even like, oh, it's bad. It's heavy. So, but I do think Arthur Edward Waite, who kind of designed this deck through Pamela Coleman Smith. He wrote an enormous book about the Holy Kabbalah, which I have not even managed to get through yet because it's huge. And he seemed to be much more of a historian who respected its origins. So
sort of jumped in front of Matt, but who asked how you got into this stuff.
Honestly, backwards. I ended up getting into astrology and tarot backwards through Kabbalah, which I got to through my interest in Judaism. So I went the other direction. I started in the more mainstream and got spookier as I went. So basically, as I started learning a little bit about Kabbalah, I found out and discovered, wow, this talks about the zodiac from like the 2nd century or whatever. That's pretty neat. And I just kind of went over here and said, oh, wow, the astrology goes right to the tarot and this stuff looks pretty cool. So it's been, it's been a ride. I didn't just start at Barnes & Noble, like, what's this stuff? And then end up here, So.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
That's really interesting. So we're on to Leslie Knight, I think.
Indeed. Hi, everyone. I feel like I have a tough act to follow. I'm going to also attempt to share my screen. There we go. Okay. So when Rabbi Mike first asked me if I would share something tonight, I said, sure. And then I went, oh gosh, what is that going to be? And I had no idea. And my just today turned 13-year-old very wisely was like, you are obsessed with plastic and with plastic waste and with reducing our household plastic use. You should do something on that. And I said, Rabbi Mike said it had to have something to do with Judaism. She's like, there's got to be something. So, and when in doubt, ask the children. That's lesson number 1 because they always know best. So indeed, I started doing some research into Bal Tashchit, this principle, this mitzvah of do not waste or do not destroy. It gets interpreted different ways.
So this is going to be a little more interactive, and I am actually a public school teacher. So of course we start with a quiz. Um, so hang on, I'm going to make this a separate tab. I'm sorry, I thought I was ready. I'm not. Okay, almost there. There we go. You can all see me, the 27 tabs I have open on my computer. So we folks can just,
Leslie,
yes.
I don't think you're sharing what you want to share.
Oh dear. What
Looks
did I
like you're
share?
sharing the website from Rainey. Is that?
No, what's
possible?
That's what I saw.
Oh goodness. How did that happen?
Do you
I
have two
wouldn't-
screens? My guess is you have two screens.
I do, but
No, I think what happened was you opened up Rainey's slides on a tab, and that was the tab you were showing,
Oh, okay.
how did
like
that
on your own computer. Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so confused. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's very confusing.
It happens
It's
a
all
lot.
good.
But I had okay. All right. Let me try that one more time. My
You
apologies.
had it before.
Had it before and then it disappeared.
Yeah,
What do you see now?
that's it.
What you want us to see.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank you, everybody. Would you believe I actually do this every day, all day? Okay. So we're just call them out. What happens to plastic waste? It's biodegradable. It never fully goes away. It just breaks into little pieces. There's no such thing as plastic waste. It can all be recycled or it's dumped in the ocean for fish to eat. Some folks are putting it in the chat.
It never goes away.
Never goes away.
Oh, folks are not putting it in the chat. It never fully goes away, just breaks into little pieces. Indeed. We won't probably do all 19. Where did it go? Next one. Why is it dangerous for marine life? They mistake it for food and they can't digest it. They get tangled in it, which hinders their ability to swim. Both A and B, or it's not dangerous because they use it for habitats.
Both A and B.
Thanks, Wacky. Indeed, and sometimes they do, in fact, use it for habitats, but that can still be dangerous for them as well. And in fact, when they mistake it for food, they do ingest it, but cannot digest it and actually die of starvation. I will happily share all of these links with you. I have a few other ones that I will share with you afterwards. Where does the majority of plastic waste end up? Oceans, burned for energy, landfills, recycled.
A giant island of plastic in the Pacific Ocean. The size of like Alaska or something horrible.
I see some head nodding. So we're going with oceans. Indeed, plastic soup. And in fact, not just in the Pacific Ocean at this point, there is one of those plastic soup gyres in the Indian Ocean. There's a smaller one in the Atlantic Ocean. The biggest one is in fact in the Pacific Ocean. From what I've read, roughly the size of Texas, could be the size of Alaska, but there are actually several smaller gyres in the Pacific Ocean as well. How many millions of tons of plastic are dumped in our oceans every year? 1 million, 8 million, 20 million, 50 million.
I really don't want it to be 50 million, but I'm just going to assume it is.
20.
You're 20, I hear 50. Let's hope that Rainey is wrong, that it's not 50 million. Let's go with 20. In fact, it's even better. It's about 8 million tons of plastic is dumped into our oceans each year, which is the equivalent of dumping one garbage truck full of plastic into the ocean every minute. If we multiply that to 50 million, we can get a sense of how devastating that can be. If nothing
Who is driving that truck? If we can find the truck driver, we'll be in good shape.
Right.
Is it Mr. Trash Man?
Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah, 4 garbage trucks per minute by 2050. So certainly in, hopefully in my lifetime and in my kids' lifetime. Absolutely. We'll end there for just a second. So I'm happy to send this to you for those of you who want some more, plastic waste trivia. So when Emmeline suggested that I, do something, talk about plastic waste, I started doing a lot of reading. And so it feels a little strange to share some of this with you. Here's the Pacific garbage patch that Rabbi Mike mentioned. That soup of plastic that is this one is actually in the Pacific Ocean. It was discovered by Captain Charles Moore, actually in the 1990s. So a little more than 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago now at this point. And you can see there are several of them, and they get caught up just in the natural ocean current circulation that actually forms these gyres in the ocean. And there's all kinds of gyres, but anywhere where there's sort of this like zone of not movement of the ocean water is where we get a patch of plastic and other trash that collects. And I've certainly read a lot over the last few months about disposable masks and all of the medical waste that we've generated, the increased amount of medical waste that we've generated out of necessity that then has also been disposed of. It cannot be recycled. Some of it is incinerated, which causes a whole host of other problems. But often our plastic waste does end up in landfills. A very small percentage of it ends up being recycled. And so I started looking into, and I think my whole life I've sort of had this we need to reuse as much as we can, sort of minimizing waste ethic. And it's just the way that I have lived my life, and I'm encouraging my children to live their lives despite the resistance of my 13-year-old and how much he makes fun of me for it. But so often I think so many of the morals and the ethics that many of us have, probably that I know I have, come from somewhere in Judaism, and I just don't even recognize that they came from somewhere in Judaism. And so thankfully this encouraged me to do, I'm not going to go through the 10 shocking facts of plastic. There's a whole National Geographic photo shoot, including some of the plastic waste recent, from over the last year. But it turns out that there is actually some kind of Jewish principles. This idea of reducing the amount of waste that we produce actually does stem from some Jewish teachings that I didn't even know were somehow embedded in me. And I think that this is where it comes from. So it actually comes from Devarim. I am not going to read the Hebrew, but when thou shalt beseech a city a long time in making your war against it to take it, thou shalt not destroy the trees thereof by wielding an axe against them. For thou may eat of them, but thou shalt not cut them down. For is the tree of the field man, that it should be besieged of thee. And so as always, when we read Torah, it is helpful to then read the rabbinic interpretations. And this is one that has been interpreted. The interpretation has deepened over the last, several thousand years, a couple thousand years. And so we're going to look at a few sort of how our understanding of this has evolved over time. But initially it came from Devarim, and it came from this idea that even when you are waging war against people, you're not waging that war against the trees, and that those trees then are providing food, and there's no reason that we need to destroy them. Has later been interpreted that whoever breaks vessels or tears garments or destroys a building or clogs a well or does away with food in a destructive manner, they violate the mitzvah of bal tashchit, do not destroy or to waste. I think I only have like 2 minutes left, so I'm not sure. I'll try to wrap up.
Which comes from that comes from that text.
Yes.
If you go back one more, you'll see that tashchit word, right? There it is.
I'm losing it.
There's no, you can't see my pointing at it, but it's
no. Here we go. Lo
of
tashchit, right here. Yep.
Yeah. There you go. So don't destroy. Sorry.
No. Thank you. I appreciate it. In the 12th century, Rambam, this was, later added to that to prohibit the killing of animals for convenience or wasting fuel on Shabbat. In a minority opinion, some people will say that this even provides the root for some people look at some Jewish texts and say this is why we should be eating a vegetarian or a vegan diet. Can also come from the same interpretation. And some have said that we should be looking to eat simpler foods as a way of not wasting also. This is the one that I wanted to, I know I only have like 1 minute. I'm trying to sort of skip through a little bit.
Leslie,
no, yes.
you have the 5 minutes of the Q&A also.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I thought it was, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that, Leslie. So one should not train to be destructive. This was one of the ones that I found the more interesting. So for Maimonides, when you bury a person, do not waste garments by burying them in the grave. It's better to give them to the poor than to cast them to worms and moths. Anyone who buries the dead in an expensive garment violates the mitzvah of Bal Tashchit. So that even when thinking about, we want to respect, we want to honor the people that we are burying when it is time to do that. But at the same time, we still want to pay attention to this mitzvah of Bal Tashchit. We don't want to waste materials that could be used for people here who still need them here on earth, and that we bury people simply and then finally from the Sefer HaChinuch, I think I have like 7 or 8 different interpretations of this from the 16th century. The purpose of Bal Tashchit is to teach us to love what is good and worthwhile and cling to it so it becomes part of us and that we avoid all that is evil and destructive. So those who, this is the way of people who look to improve society, that nothing, not even a grain of mustard should be lost to the world, that they regret any loss or any destruction they see. And if possible, they would prevent any destruction that they can. So we have the equating of people who rejoice in the destruction of the world with who are wicked, and those who are looking to preserve every piece of the world as being those who are righteous. So I'm going to pause here for just a second, and I know I have a lot of other of resources really just on the plastic waste piece of it, but I think it is really one of the if we think about all of the things facing our planet right now, the fact that the plastic that we produce right now, in fact, scientists will say that all of the plastic that has ever been produced is still here on the planet. So it's only been around for, first invented in the late 1800s, has really come into widespread use in like the 1940s and 50s with single-use plastic, and has exploded really since then. I forgot where I was going with that. But if we think about the destruction that it causes to the planet, oh, that's what I was going to say. So if we think about all of the different issues facing our planet, from humanitarian crises to environmental crises, what we leave behind on the planet, and it's very actually closely linked to climate change as well, but what we leave behind on the planet, I think, is one of the biggest ones, and the legacy of what we're leaving. And so I just wanted to share that and share some of the, Bal Tashchit was not something that I knew a whole lot about before today. So let me pause there. Something.
Looked like you were asking us what we were going to do about it, which was very inconvenient. It was very inconvenient, Leslie. I was sort of annoyed.
Sorry. I can put it back up there and continue to annoy you. There is a fair amount of research. So thank you, Naya. Someone mentioned medical waste wouldn't be so wasteful if it was made from mushroom fibers. There's research into that, and also into making it of more durable material so it can actually be autoclaved and sanitized and reused. So not everything that's used in medical practices can that would even work for, but more than what we're doing right now. So other thoughts or questions?
I wonder, working, yeah, with Matt, he just unmuted himself. He's doing some of this work in the shul.
I was just wondering, since I only learned about this phrase or verse, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, it seems like a throwaway, that it was just buried in this other topic about besieging a city. What do you make of that? Because I was always troubled by that.
That it's not called out on its own, you mean?
Exactly. And I guess I just used the term throwaway as a double entendre unintentionally.
I see what you did there. I appreciate what you did there.
I didn't mean to.
So we can see each other. Yeah, it's an interesting point. Although it is sort of buried in this like rules of war, I'm glad you asked that question. The fact that it has been interpreted and reinterpreted and revisited and deepened so many ways, and is like the founding principle of so many different, there's the Coalition for the Environment in Jewish Life. I mean, there's other Jewish environmental organizations that really use this as their raison d'etre, right? Like so over the last 1,000 years, it has been reinterpreted and revisited. I mean, initially, it's not a primary, I hear what you're saying, right? Like, it's not like the focus of the verse itself, but it somehow has stood out to people that they've felt the need to revisit it and come back to it and reinterpret it for modern times. So I guess that's sort of my take on it. I don't know, maybe it's also just a sign of the times in which it was written, right at the time of the Torah was first read. Maybe the lifestyle at the time didn't necessitate looking at wasteful practices as much maybe as it does now, or as it did over the next 1,000 years. Wacky.
We've been studying this as one of our monthly Jewish values in the preschool, and we've tied it together with Tu B'Shvat.
Awesome, thank you. So you're saying that the 3-year-olds probably know more about this than I do?
Probably.
Awesome.
I don't think they could pronounce it. But they've been studying about don't waste stuff.
Yeah.
This is the rabbinic mind, right? The rabbinic creativity. It also says don't boil a calf in its mother's milk, and you're like, okay, I'm not doing that, which we extrapolate to mean don't eat milk and meat together and then separate dishes, which is not that old, right? We think, oh, separate dishes, that's a big religious Jewish thing. That's 100 and something years old, maybe 200 years old, right? So the rabbis give us permission to build off of this, and we see Talmud has it, Maimonides has it, and so yeah, sometimes that's how it works. You pick out a little thing that's in a text, and you build a whole ethic around it. So that's very Jewish.
Yeah, I will say that it's something that I've
There's
come
another.
to. Sorry, I don't know who that was talking.
Was it
I
Michael
think I cut
Bialas?
someone off.
That was me.
Yes, thank you, Michael, please.
I was just going to say that one of the things you didn't mention is one of the places we're putting the plastic is in ourselves, that there's some reports that we might be ingesting through breathing and eating about a credit card's worth of plastic a day, and the biological implications of that are not clear, but there are some indications that it's not the best for us. And I'm sure the rabbi could come up with another biblical quote about the fact that we're not supposed to be hurting ourselves.
A day, Michael? A credit card a day?
A day.
No.
That was a report out of the WHO or something like that several years back.
I mean,
don't
it'd
know
be
how
probably
accurate
good
that is,
for
but
our-
even if it's one credit card a week.
Probably be
No, I've
good for
heard-
our budgets to eat our credit cards instead of using them, but
No, I've heard something similar, and certainly if you look at a lot of the clothing that we wear, every time we're doing laundry, like all of the polyesters and the fleece and the everything else, and every time you're washing that, you're then shedding microplastics into the water supply.
Yeah.
And that is one of the ways that we then later ingest them. We can't actually get that out of our water supply. If I think about it, the first thing I touch every morning is my alarm clock, which is made of plastic, right? So it's everywhere. I don't think we're going to get rid of it anytime soon, but if we can find ways to reduce the single use, right? The water bottles, the grocery bags, the packaging from the grocery store, those kinds of things, I think it will go a long way. I mean, I've had my alarm clock for 15 years, right? I don't throw that out, but there's so much else that ends up as waste so quickly.
Right. And I think we're actually going to have to stop there. But thank you.
Thank you.
Really interesting. And Wacky?
Yes. When the mountains heard that God was preparing to give the Jewish people the Torah, they began to fight for the honor of being the chosen place. Mount Tabor said, God should choose me. In the time of Noah, when the earth was flooded, only I, the tallest of the mountains, stood safely above the waters. Mount Hermon argued, God should choose me. When the Jewish people fled Egypt and the sea parted, I settled between the shores so that they were able to cross safely on my slopes. Mount Carmel said, God should choose me. I'm the only mountain on sea and on land. No matter where God wishes to give the Torah, I am there. But God replied, because all of you brag and quarrel about your greatness, I will not choose you. Instead, he chose Mount Sinai, a small, low, and humble mountain. Next.
I think that's me, Wacky, right? Bob Ferrara. Do I go?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Does it go to spotlight view or how does this work? I'm not seeing me, but
I see you.
okay. Do you see my book?
Yes.
This book, can everybody see the book? It's called Outwitting History, and it's what I'm going to talk about. And I read several years ago and actually did a presentation here many years ago, but I dusted it off and have been reading it recently. And it is a lovely, lovely book. People like us would really enjoy it. I would love to just see a gallery view. How many people have read this book or have any? So Wacky, of course you've read it. Actually, a couple, but not all. So allow me to give you a story. Oh, and Barbara read it too. So it's actually won quite a few awards in its day. But it's the lovely, improbable, crazy story of one determined dreamer and what he accomplished. His name is Aaron Lansky. And this book actually won the 2004 Book Award for Massachusetts Book Award for the best nonfiction. So for those of you that didn't read it, let me just give you a little synopsis of this book. It's the story of Aaron Lansky, founder and president of the Yiddish Book Center. And he was a graduate student in Montreal, actually at McGill, in the late 70s, when he discovered that a large number of Yiddish books were being discarded by younger Jews who could not read the language of their parents and grandparents, and also the grandparents were passing on. So he took what he expected would be a 2-year leave of absence from graduate school. That was his big leap. And he founded the Yiddish Book Center, kind of on a wing and a prayer. And in the summer of 1980, he issued a public appeal saying, give me your books, if you can. At the time, the scholars believe there's only 70,000 Yiddish books left in creation that he could even you'd ever put your hands on. Well, they went on, they started a journey. He and a couple of friends started a journey where they've recovered over now 1.5 million books. So there was a lot more out there, and he did much more than keep these books alive, which we can actually go see if we want. But he really helped to revive the whole language of Yiddish and keep it alive. So I divided my little presentation. I don't have fancy things like Leslie did or Rainey. Those are lovely. But I just wanted to answer 4 questions about this book that I thought would be fun. So one of the, and by the way, others are welcome to pipe in, particularly if you've read it. And so I thought the first question is, what did I like best about this book? And that was actually my first one. I loved it because you saw people that were doing what they loved, and they just kind of jumped, they leaped before they looked. And so they, among other things, these are college kids. Actually, his love started when he was still at Hampshire College out here in Western Mass. He takes a trip with a couple of his buddies to the Lower East Side and in Manhattan just to absorb some Yiddish culture. He had just discovered Yiddish culture. He had a little bit of his own in his background, but very little, and it was kind of kept in the background, because these are people trying to assimilate. So he hung out by the Jewish Forward. He learned that venerable place. And this was back when the Lower East Side, which I had been there too in the early 70s, it still had a lot of Yiddish feel to it. So I love that they just were young, crazy college kids doing what they want to do. Do it just on a flyer. Then things get even better when they set up the Jewish Yiddish Book Center, again on a wing and a prayer. But they got into things called dumpster diving, which usually has another connotation. But what they found was a lot of the books were just being thrown away because nobody thought they had any value. So he and his buddies literally went chasing in dumpsters, and mostly in New York City, but not exclusively. And really saved many, many books that way. The other kind of thing that I liked in those, I worked at a college for a number of years, but the 5 colleges of Western Mass were a special breeding ground for him. He went to Hampshire, where those of you that are familiar with kind of, you're allowed to do your own thing much more than other places. So he crafted this study of his own around Yiddish and a lot of wonderful Jewish things, but it also came back to him in other ways. But the other advantage of the 5 colleges is that you can take courses at any of the 5 colleges. So he and his friends, actually it came down to just 2 other people, they were unhappy with the Yiddish courses offered at their school. And so they found a professor at UMass Amherst that would teach them. And so they did, and they commuted over to UMass. So they took full advantage of this wonderful time of their lives. So then he gets us a scholarship to go up to McGill in Montreal, where he finally decided he really had to just do it. It was now or never. So anyway, those are the things I like best. It's just a crazy story. You couldn't make any of this stuff up. It actually happened. So another question that comes after you're reading this book is you want to learn more about Yiddish. So what do you learn about Yiddish? Well, now the rabbi could tell us a lot more, and some of you can probably tell us a lot more, but this is what I learned, that it really, we all know it's a form of German, but it uses—
Anthony knows way more than I do. So
okay, yeah,
he's your expert.
All right. I'm sure, and Anthony can speak it well, probably very well right now, and sing it even better. But what I got out of it was that it really kind of evolved mostly among the women in the 1500s, and then it became the lingua franca for the whole Jewish community across not just Germany, but the much wider Eastern Europe. And actually, it didn't produce any literature for a while because it was spoken among the women. Sorry, we're back in the 1500s and 1600s, but you get closer to the 1800s, and it actually started producing an incredible literature, a wonderful literature, but one that stopped almost completely with the Holocaust. So it has a very unusual curve of when the works were created. It's it's stacked into the 1800s and early 1900s, unlike almost any literature in the world. Any language in the world. And of course, as Anthony could tell you, it is probably the most expressive language in the world. How these people made up all these words that now are actually part of English, like schlep, shtick, chutzpah, all of those are wonderful words that came out of Yiddish. The other thing that came out of the work of Aaron was it's now taught at least when the book was written, 25 different colleges. So, you know, before he could barely find a professor that knew it out of the 5 colleges in Western Mass, there's now, it's in a lot of variety of academic institutions. So he not only saved the books, he's saving the language. So, and actually one other thing that's worthy of note, it is actually the most digitized language in the world, because what these folks were doing in the Yiddish Center as it develops more into the 2000s, they're digitizing everything. So almost all the great works, the 1.5 million books, are pretty well digitized by now. In other words, you can get digital copies of them, which is not true of certainly English or you know, most other languages in the world. So actually, we're all getting digitized now, but they led the charge. So what did we learn? My third question, the third of the 4. I'm trying to be a little respectful of our time here. What did I learn about Aaron Lansky other than that he's nuts? he was willing to try anything and do anything, and had some wonderful friends to help him. Well, he's a pretty standard, he sounds like a pretty standard kid when he starts, and just interesting. But when he was 19, he learned about the Holocaust. He actually was just not spoken of much in his house, even though it was a Jewish household in New Bedford, Mass. But he just, that stuck with him, and that really opened a thing in his curiosity and his wanting to do it, that it just carried him through. And in fact, around, I think there's 2, I've seen both 1989 and 1985 as years when he won the MacArthur grant. So one of those 2, he won one of these MacArthur Genius Awards, which really exceptional people get that are incredibly passionate about something like he was. I just think he's the coolest guy. I have never met him. Rabbi, have you ever met him? Or Anthony?
I have not. I don't know if Anthony has.
Yeah.
There's a possibility that I have met him. Every time I'm in the Yiddish Book Center, there's about 25 people whose hands I have to shake. So it's very likely that I have met him.
He's, you know,
he came and spoke at our synagogue many years ago.
No, Hankus Netsky spoke.
No, this is way before.
Oh, he did? Okay. Because I know we invited Hankus Netsky, who was then chairman of the board of the Yiddish Book Center. And of course, Anthony and the others know well. I mean, Hankus Netsky is big time klezmer player.
He was our artist in residence.
Yes, right. When maybe 10
years at Bob.
15 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
He had.
Well, Sarah was there.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke to us, and this is when he was fairly early in the process of going out and, you know, with trucks and, you know, going to people's homes, and again, as he said, the children of the Yiddish speakers, and we had him at Beth Elohim. It was fascinating.
Oh wow, that had to be a while ago, Louis. At least before So I remember we had Hankus there. Must be before we had Hankus there.
There's a new children's book.
2009.
Oh, there you go. The book.
A new children's book for ages like till 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The Book Rescuer.
Okay.
They are.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Louis.
Just ever so briefly, I want to say there's always, you know, given that we're in a synagogue, there's always a possibility of there being a chance to save books now. I can't tell you how often I've found Yiddish language books that were put in the Geniza in a given synagogue because people didn't know what they were. If you have things like that in your house, just give them to somebody, have them look them over before you put them in the Geniza. There could be something really interesting there. I recorded an entire...
People are going to drop them off at our house. You know that, Anthony, right?
Oh, Lord. Okay. Well, then maybe you should put them in the Geniza. I'm just saying, like, people people have things. I recorded an entire album with a bunch of other musicians. It was from a children's Yiddish language songbook from Soviet Russia. No one knew that it existed. It's the only copy of this book that exists. It's a major historical document, but somebody left it at the right person's doorstep, and that's how it was saved. Otherwise, who knows where it would be.
This is wonderful. Anthony, actually, my last question, my fourth question and final, was what can we do as individuals now that we know a little bit more about this or are learning about it? And one is to save books, like you suggested. I think dropping them off at your house is a great suggestion. But
you don't have to do that, but you can take a quick picture on your cell phone and send it to somebody. You post it on Facebook, at least figure out what it is before you decide you want to toss it.
The other thing, you can also read the book, but the thing, and I talked to Matt Liebman a little bit about this, I would love to do a little, a convoy out there, or have a field trip sponsored by Adult Ed out there, and it would be fun. We talked about it years ago, but we never wound up pulling it off.
Yes, we did. We went out to the Yiddish book store.
We did? Okay. Yep. I remember
Doesn't mean we can't do it again.
Okay. All right. Well, Matt was up for it, and I'd be up for it. Just to get out to lovely Western Mass. And it's, for those of you that want to go on your own, it's at Hampshire College, his alma mater, which I know Hampshire's been on the ropes a little bit, but I haven't heard that they've closed the book center or anything like that. It is closed during COVID, but it should be reopening. So we'll get that on the Wacky. Would you be up for that too?
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
As long as we can also go to the Eric Carle Museum.
Okay, we can make it a
also
two-part.
on the property.
During the summer, they have a program called Yidstock. They have klezmer, like Hank Osnetsky is there. They have films. They have all kinds of things. And Mel and I went a few years ago. We were passing through. We were only staying there one night. So we saw part of it. It was wonderful. So that would be a really interesting time to go if you want to have the music as well as seeing the books.
Rachel, what are the dates you spoke of? What do you know the dates?
Well, it's in the summer, but this summer is still going to be on Zoom, from what I understand.
Okay.
So it would have to be later than that.
There's a very great possibility your Rebbitzin might have headlined at Yidstock in 2018 or something, but I wouldn't know. Anyway.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll
if only we knew who that person was. We could ask them.
I just want you to know it was Dimitri and I. So it's not like, this community has not had the experience of, of seeing us as musicians. Like, you guys only get the best, and you get it before the Yiddish Book Center does. So there it is.
We'll take it. We'll take it. Thank you. And thank you so much, Leslie and others. If there are any other questions or comments, happy. But I, for one, am looking forward to be on this trip with Wacky and others, and hopefully many others. So.
I just finished a course that was offered by Maya for the community from Hebrew College, and it was about the Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh.
And it was a wonderful course. It was 2 semesters. And we actually had 5 of the actors from the Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof who came to speak to us during the last class. And we all got to sing. Just, not very much, but we got to sing. And if I were a rich man, for the Yiddish presentation is if I were a Rothschild. Is how that's done. Very interesting. It was a wonderful course.
That's great. All right.
We are staying on an unbelievably on-target schedule.
We are.
Isn't that amazing?
How about time for a little stretch?
Okay.
All right. Potty break.
2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Okay. We've been going
Cough, Bob. That was great.
Yeah.
Now we just have to figure out the Yiddish for Ferrara. Right? It's like iron worker, right?
That's what Ferrara means in Italian. You know, ferrum, the Latin ferrum, ferrus.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
I
To
think
figure out what the Yiddish is.
A schmid is a smith, right? Like a goldschmied means a
Oh.
goldsmith. So I mean that's one half of the word there.
Yeah.
An ironsmith.
An ironschmied, an ironschmied.
Is there something Eisen or something as
Eisen, it's Eisen.
Eisen.
Like an Ackereisen is like an iron plow.
Okay.
Yeah. An Eisenbahn is an iron train. So an Eisenschmied, I guess, is Ferrara. It's much easier to say Ferrara. Not gonna lie.
Bob Eisenschmidt. I'm ready. I'm ready for the transformation.
I'll take it. Yeah.
All right. And just when are we coming back together? Or in like 2 minutes? Is that what we said?
2 minutes from whenever.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
120 seconds. Okay.
Right. I'm going to get the.
Is anybody still on? Does anybody know what Baba Yaga's teeth were made out of?
Not at all.
Baba Yaga had metal teeth.
Wait, folks, I have a sick kid, so unfortunately, I'm gonna have to step away from this. But thank you. This is all very interesting, and I'm sorry I can't stay a little bit longer. But
Thank you for doing that. It was wonderful. I want to learn how to not have plastic at home, but it's a big challenge.
it is. I love Rabbi Mike's question about what do we do structurally, like policy-wise. How do we advocate for system-wide change? But anyway, thank you for letting me share. Thank you.
Thank you,
for
Leslie.
teaching. I appreciate it. Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag Sameach.
Okay, Matt, you're back, and I think we should go on. Yeah, Joseph?
Yes. Good evening, Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Just honored to be asked to learn at this session. It's so nice to see so many wonderful folks, and I wanted to dedicate our learning, at least my portion tonight, to our brethren, our brothers and sisters in Israel, who are celebrating this holiday under very difficult circumstances. And I just wanted to, acknowledge the fact that just as a Sefer Torah is whole only with every single letter in it, so too the Jewish people are whole with every Jew participating in this learning and helping elevate each other. So as we undergo difficult physical situations, our spiritual learning that we do here in Boston environs is really going to make a difference. So I just wanted to dedicate that. So let me just share the screen here. Can everyone see this? Mount Sinai experience, yes?
We see it. Yes, we see it.
We see it. Looks good.
Okay, let's see. You see a full screen, right?
Well, we
Okay.
see your speaker view.
Oh,
Yeah.
It says next slide.
okay. So if I just just want to make sure the right screen is shown. Do you
Yeah, it's
see?
usually because you have two screens open.
I have three, so.
Yeah, you still have the next slide panel, so.
Okay.
But you can read it. It's,
Yeah. Can you read it?
yeah.
Okay, very good. As long as you can read it. Oh, okay. If I just slide it over here, is that better?
No.
No?
It's the same. It's okay.
All right. So we're going to start. This is the Mount Sinai experience. I want to just kind of go through the order of events. We're not going to read the text, but I did summarize it. Just it's such a transformative experience. 3,333 years ago.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
Joseph. We're on like your fourth or fifth slide for some reason.
Right. Sorry about that.
I think we're
So
just making it worse. I'm sorry for talking.
no, it's okay. Let me stop sharing and we'll bring this up again and share my screen. Share. Okay, share. There's three choices here. We'll share this screen and I'll bring the PowerPoint to that screen. Is that better? No?
Yeah, it's just, yeah, go to there you go.
Okay. It's not full screen, I know, but.
And now if you want, you could start slideshow from beginning, if you can press that.
All right, I'll do that.
You should open the slideshow, then do the sharing. But
Okay,
maybe,
that's a good idea.
It
too.
looks fine now.
It looks fine now? Okay, let's move on. So this is the order of events. We are going through chapter 19. Can everyone see this slide? On the third month of leaving Egypt on this day? Yes?
Yes.
Good.
Yep.
So we came to the Sinai desert and they singular, Vayachan Sham, and we camped there in a singular. And as I said earlier, it's a concept of everybody being unified and everyone coming together in one heart, one mind. Moses ascends. God says, "You saw what I did to you to Egypt. We carried you out of wings of eagles, and I want you to be my kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Moses comes down and briefs the elders. We say, "We will do." Naaseh v'nishma. In this particular verse, we just say naaseh. There's other, Ten Commandment experiences throughout the Tanakh, the Torah, that have the actual naaseh v'nishma. We will do first, and we will listen. And there's a preparation, and there's a warning about the mountain. I don't know how much we've done in terms of Midrashim earlier in the evening, but one of the things that's told about Naaseh v'nishma is this concept of the free choice that we had in terms of just accepting what God was about to give us. And we'll touch upon that later. Moses descends, repeats the message, and they comply. So we do follow through with that. And then on the third day, we have thunder and lightning, this tremendous sound of a shofar, trembling, and Moses leads us out of the camp, and we assemble at the foot of the mountain. Then again, fire and smoke, tremendous shofar sound. God answers Moses directly, and then there's a back and forth one more time, and Moses kind of interacts with God, and God tells him to go down, and Moses does. And then the big reveal, the 10 Commandments. I'm sure we need a slide for this. It's the Shavuot, so we want to put that on here. We're not going to go through them, but here they are. And the reaction is the fact that they do see the sound and lightning, the shofar, smoke, and fury, and they ask Moses to be the intermediary. And Moses tells them, "Don't be afraid. This is only a test." And Moses approaches the cloud, and God gives them the admonition that you should have no silver, gold gods, And at the end of this chapter, chapter 20 of the reaction, there's a mention of not cutting a stone altar with a sword, and make a ramp, not steps, for the altar. So this is really both chapter 19 and 20. So I have a few questions as far as what transformed at this moment of revelation. And one thing we can ask ourselves, is it the mountain? Is it the earth, the heavens and earth? Is it the Jewish nation? Is it each person individually? And we're going to go and kind of discuss those three things. From a mountain perspective, we know the mountain was called Mount Sinai, and some say that it was the location of the burning bush, the sneh, and that's why it's called Mount Sinai. So there was a concept that this mountain did have some holiness to it when God told Moses to take off his shal na'alecha, take your shoes off, because this place is holy. But we are also told that Mount Sinai was the lowest of the mountains and is not considered holy anymore. We really don't even know physically where it's located specifically. It was referred to as Mount Horeb as well. And so we're not saying that even though we had this spectacular sound and light show, it wasn't so much the mountain that transformed, but it was the essence of that revelation. So it wasn't necessarily the exact mountain. The Jewish nation, of course, were transformed at that moment, and each person individually as well. So we want to discuss or examine the paradigm shift that occurred during this Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. So the way I've kind of distilled it here is God was a creator. He created the heavens and the earth in the beginning, and of course took us out of Egypt before Matan Torah, before the giving of the Torah. And afterwards, God is our partner. We do know that we become, like betrothed to God at that moment. It's like a wedding, and so we and God become partners. And then, of course, so there's that shift in relationship with God, as opposed to, few like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and others mentioned in Bereshit and Exodus. I'm sorry, in Genesis, throughout Exodus until Moshe comes, are making those connections directly with God. But here, after Matan Torah, after the giving of the Torah, we are deemed to be a holy nation, and we can each make that connection. We can make that connection with God on a very personal level, and become a chosen people. And I just wanted to mention, going back to Na'aseh V'Nishma, what we were saying earlier. There's the famous midrash about God offering the Torah to all the various nations, saying, each one was saying, what's in it? Do not steal. Well, we can't do that. We can't accept it. Others would say, do not murder. We can't accept that. We murder around here. That's our way of doing it. So, we won't accept it. And of course, the Jewish people famously said, we will, this is going to be something, again, from the God that just took us out of Egypt. He's a loving God. We're going to accept what is being offered without really understanding it. We'll work later to understand it. So the way looking at that, one thought is that, I know it's a midrash, but it's like, what would have happened if the other nations would have chosen to accept the Torah? What would have really happened? Clearly it's a midrash, but I think what we learn from that is almost like God was treating every nation and every human being as equal at that moment, and He was offering us free choice. He was offering us the choice of choosing that connection, choosing that covenant with, and making a connection with God. And it was only the Jewish nation that made that choice, that made that decision. And so the fact that all humanity was equal in God's eyes at that moment, but we were able to demonstrate a level higher than that. We were able to rise above that, and that was part of our transformation. I wanted to also cover the fact that Kedusha, the holiness, you know, was transformative at the moment of Matan Torah, because the whole nature of the world in terms of God having a place in physicality and you know, the physical domain is what has changed, so that we are, as Jews, our responsibility is to elevate the mundane, and that did not occur earlier. We basically have examples of Jacob, for example, donning tefillin. You know, there's a concept that all the foremothers observe the Torah even though they didn't receive the Torah yet. You know, like Passover matzah during the angels visiting Abraham, so forth. And Jacob, we're told, practiced the phylacteries, practiced putting on tefillin, but he did it with sticks, you know, by his herds and sheep. And he would do this on a daily basis, but he would throw those sticks out. There was no concept of Kedusha. These straps were not holy in any way. After Matan Torah and Sinai, after this experience, you know, the tefillin are in fact holy. The Jew putting on tefillin makes that leather strap and the box and the parchment and the Sefer Torah and so forth and so on. We talked about Gniza earlier, you know, putting those away in an appropriate manner. That's because there is holiness imbued in them. And it's, again, our purpose, we learn to elevate the mundane and actually infuse it with holiness. So that's you know, part of the paradigm shift that we have here. So we talked about the tefillin, and I have one more thing here. I wanted to discuss Shavuot as one of the three festivals. And basically, it's probably hard to see here, but what I'm saying is that during the high holidays and Sukkot, we know the three festivals.
The wrong slide is showing.
What? The wrong slide? Which slide are we showing? Okay, that's okay. I can talk through it. I'll stop sharing. Basically, I wanted to just mention the Shavuot as part of the three festivals. As we know, Sukkot and the high holiday period is kind of the birth of the world, right? Hayom Harat Olam. It's the birth of creation, and it's God as creator. Whereas Passover is the birth of our nation as a nation. You know, so that we're forged out of the Egypt experience and brought together as a nation. And finally, Shavuot is the marriage. It's having a partner and making a commitment to you know, the Almighty at that moment. And we do the same here, you know, in terms of our commitments to our partners and so forth. So it's just I see the parallel of going through one's life in terms of birth, you know, becoming a grown person, growing up, if you will, and making that commitment to your partner, and you know, giving to the other, and doing the Torah, you know, the commandments and so forth, out of love for the other person, and proceeding that way. So that's you know, lessons that I've learned regarding Shavuot. And one of the personal experiences I wanted to share was when one time, it was about 20 years ago or so, that I made, speaking of the three festivals, I made this trip to Israel for like a long weekend, just with a rabbi friend of mine, just to make, if you will, like Aliyah L'Regel, just to go to Israel for a long weekend for the holiday of Shavuot. And you know, we arrived on a Thursday. Shavuot was Friday and Shabbat, And, you know, we stayed up all night. This was by the hotel, learning and so forth. And it was a tremendously enriching experience. But one of the things that I felt, being, you know, davening by the hotel, at the end of that experience in the morning, hearing the 10 Commandments, being exhausted, but never mind, the sun was rising over the hotel. And it was just this amazing calm and amazing feeling of, this is where you belong. You know, this idea that you are one with your people. You're all, you know, joined together with your people, and you're one with the Almighty, with Kadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem, and you're where you need to be. We, throughout life, we're all running around and you know, just expecting to be somewhere else. But the fact that you're on one of these high holidays, and one of these Shloshet Regalim, or 3 festivals, you're in the by the Kotel, the, you know, Jerusalem, a Jew praying for Shavuot, and it was just this tremendous transformation of you are where you're supposed to be. So that was my Shavuot experience that I enjoyed.
Shkaya.
Thanks, Joseph. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that. I love that idea of transformation. So beautiful. And the image of you at the kotel on Shavuot. I love it.
Well, and we now come up to Steve Richter, I think.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, let me get my slides. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, fine. I don't have that many slides. I'm not going to be going through a slide presentation. This will be mainly a discussion. I don't think that I had ever previously read the Book of Ruth in English. Indeed, I don't recall even hearing the Book of Ruth read in Hebrew or any language, whether during Shavuos or at any other time. For example, the Chabad tradition, and I do now attend a Chabad synagogue, does not include the reading of Ruth during the Shavuos morning service. And though I knew the basic story, I did not really understand its relationship to Shavuos. I now do understand that the connection has to do with commitment to the Torah, which the entire Jewish people agreed to at Sinai, and which Ruth, the convert, committed to when she clung to Naomi as Naomi returned to Israel from the land of Moab. So I took the time to read the book of Ruth, partly to fill the gap in my education, and partly out of curiosity about the statement that I had heard that King David, who descended from Ruth, and Goliath, who was slain by David, were actually distant cousins. So that I don't keep everyone in suspense, I'll say right now that it appears that David and Goliath may have been either third cousins or first cousins 3 times removed, or somewhere in between, depending upon which midrash we believe. Despite their relation, it is very unlikely that they had ever met before their duel, and likely did not know they were related for reasons which should become obvious as the story unfolds. Does the book of Ruth actually show that David and Goliath were related? No, it's from the Midrash. Much of what I learned and included in this discussion is not from the actual words of the book of Ruth. In order to fill in the gaps, I needed to rely on various interpretations and explanations from the Talmud. Without the commentaries from the rabbis, some of the events don't make total sense. So I will give a brief synopsis of the story in the book, and while doing so, introduce the main characters, the main supporting characters, and some of the other characters and some implied characters, and discuss their situations in life. What kind of people were these? So, Naomi and her husband Elimelech and their two sons, Machlon and Kilion, who lived in Bethlehem, were faced with a famine, and they went to Moab, where there was more food. Now, much has been made of the meaning of the names Machlon and Kilion. Why would anyone name their kids sickness and destruction? Well, perhaps those were not their given names, but rather descriptions of their untimely deaths. Well, we don't know. But in any case, the family left Israel, crossed the Jordan River into what is now Jordan, and dwelt there in the land of Moab. So immediately we get to see that Elimelech, or perhaps Naomi, was privileged. Well to do enough to be able to uproot their family and travel. Indeed, we find out later that their close relative Boaz owned a plantation in Bethlehem and had numerous servants, so was also well-to-do. Some Midrashic sources indicate that Boaz and Elimelech were brothers. Others indicate that they were cousins. Boaz was the 10th judge of Israel, and Elimelech's name contained both the word king and one of God's names. Clearly, they were elites, coming from the top families in the tribe of Judah. But hear this, some sources indicate that Naomi's father was also a brother to Elimelech, which if true, would mean that Naomi married her uncle, which is one of the forbidden unions. Perhaps that's why Elimelech and his sons died while they were in Moab. Or perhaps it was because when he left Israel for Jordan, he left the poorer folks to fend for themselves during the famine. To be fair, other sources imply that Naomi and Elimelech were cousins, perhaps once removed, so maybe it was okay for them to marry. But the fact that they were people of means and left their starving neighbors is telling. The possibly forbidden union between Elimelech and Naomi, let me see if I could get to the next page. I don't know why this isn't going to the next page. Okay, let me try again. Let me get this here, and let me page up. There, okay. The possibly forbidden union between Elimelech and Naomi was not the only questionable relationship in their family tree. This is showing their family tree. Generations from Jacob. Now you may recall that Judah had 3 children, the oldest having been married to Tamar and died childless. By the rules of levirate marriage, where a close relative like a brother has to ensure that a childless deceased husband have a child named after him, Judah's second son was then married to Tamar, and he also died childless. So then Judah's third son was supposed to marry Tamar, but Judah kept delaying the marriage because he feared losing his third son. So Tamar was peeved, to put it bluntly, and decided that if she couldn't marry Judah's third son, she would finagle Judah into a union with her. She posed as a prostitute, and she bore him Perez. Okay, so you see there, after Judah comes Perez, and then a number of generations down, you see Boaz, and finally ending with King David at the end. So let's see. In Moab, it was arranged for Elimelech's 2 sons to get wives from the women of Moab. It's unclear whether this was arranged by Elimelech before he died or by Naomi after Elimelech's death, or perhaps by Machlon and Kilion themselves after their father's death. Either way, as an indication of how privileged the family was, the sons hooked up with two princesses. Yeah, we'll go back to here. The two princesses, Orpah and Ruth. The text does not indicate which princess married which son. One source indicates that Orpah was actually Kilion's son. Do you still see the slide?
Relation.
Now we do.
Okay, there we go. Let me find where I was in my text. Okay, Ruth and Orpah were sisters, according to Midrash, as well as being sisters-in-law, being granddaughters of King Eglon of Moab, who may have been the son of Balak. That I have on the, well, no, I'll just discuss it. Balak, you may recall from the Torah, was the Moabite king who requested that Balaam curse the Israelites. So when Ruth clung to her mother-in-law Naomi and went with her as both poor women back to Israel, she was leaving royalty to become what was essentially a beggar. Now that was dedication. Orpah as well first refused to leave Naomi, but when asked for a third time, she relented and stayed behind in Moab, while Ruth would not go back even after 3 requests. Perhaps this is the reason for today's rule of conversion, where the convert has to agree 3 times to follow the Torah. So the main characters were Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. The main supporting characters were Elimelech, his 2 sons, and Orpah. As I show, the other characters were Judah and his descendants, which was listed on a prior slide, and the other Redeemer, which I'll be discussing shortly, while there were also some implied characters, Balak and Eglon, the Moab kings, and somebody by the name of Raphagoth and Goliath, these latter 2, which I'll discuss a bit later. So back in Bethlehem, Naomi had 2 issues, one implied and one in the foreground. Implied is how to buy the estate, the land that her husband Elimelech owned before they left for Moab. On this, I'm unclear after reading the book whether this was land that Elimelech sold before they left for Moab, or the land that the family still owned by Naomi that she needed to sell part of in order to have resources. The other issue was how to get Ruth a husband so that she could finally have a child. Each of these issues in those days would ordinarily be taken care of by a so-called redeemer, a close relative who would buy the land for Naomi and would be a husband to Ruth. In this context, note that Naomi did not need to acquire a husband. She already had 2 sons, although they didn't survive, and she considered herself too old to conceive yet again. That's what she told Ruth and Orpah, don't wait for me to have another child. It was Ruth who needed to be connected to a redeemer, and Boaz was eligible to be a redeemer. So as the story continues, Naomi asks Ruth to glean in the fields so that they would have food to eat, and Ruth does so eagerly and with much efficiency, in spite of the fact that she was a princess. And she happened to be gleaning in the field that was owned by Boaz, apparently without knowing the familial relationship between Naomi and Boaz. But Boaz asked his foreman who Ruth was and tells his workers to be kind to Ruth, and he encourages Ruth to glean as much as she is able to. As an aside, Boaz is kind to all his employees, but especially so to Ruth because of her relationship with his relative Naomi. Then, when Naomi finds out from Ruth whose field she was gleaning in, she concocted a plot to get Boaz to marry Ruth. Boaz did not live on his plantation, but his habit was to winnow the grain in his threshing barn at the plantation, and he would even sleep there during the harvest season. So Naomi instructed Ruth to get dressed up, put on her perfume and everything else like that, and to lie down at Boaz's feet when Boaz was asleep. And when Boaz woke and saw a woman at his feet and asked who she was, Ruth told him she was there since he was a redeemer. Thus, he knew he had to do something both to redeem the homestead for Naomi and to get Ruth a husband. Now, according to what Boaz said to Ruth at that point, there was another possible redeemer. And that other redeemer is not named in the book of Ruth, but presumably a closer relative than Boaz was. So while Boaz implied that he would be happy to redeem the homestead and marry Ruth, he felt he had to give the closer relative, the mystery redeemer, the first opportunity. To do this, he went to the city gate, found the other redeemer, assembled a minyan of elders. Now, a minyan is needed to record a legal agreement, so that's why he assembled 10 elders. And he asked the redeemer whether he would take care of the land redemption, or else he, Boaz, would do so. The redeemer said, sure, he would redeem Elimelech's field, but then Boaz dropped the bombshell. The redeemer of the field would also have to acquire Ruth the Moabitess. At this, the redeemer demurred, concerned that his own inheritance could be marred if he married Ruth, and he took off his shoe, as was the custom then. And it was agreed before the witnesses that Boaz bought all that was Elimelech's, as well as of Elimelech's sons, and that he would also be purchasing Ruth to be his wife. So the remaining 12 verses of the book ends with these things. Number one, all the men that were there at the city gate wished Boaz and Ruth well, and Ruth conceived and had a son. Naomi helped bring up the son, that's number two, whose name was Ovid, and three, who is then identified as the father of Yishai, whose name should be familiar to all of you. The final 5 verses provide the genealogy that I showed on the first slide, which I could show again, from Perez down to King David. So these 4 brothers, according to the Midrash, Boaz, Elimelech, Naomi's father, and the Redeemer were all brothers. Naomi's father obviously had Naomi as a child. Elimelech and Naomi married and had Machlon and Kilion, who married Ruth and Orpah. And then Ruth married Boaz after her husband died, and their child was Ovid, and eventually came Yishai and King David. So let's see where Goliath enters the story. That is a mystery here. Maybe we'll find, oh yes, here. Okay, what's the relationship between David and Goliath? When Orpah was finally convinced to return to her ancestral home, she didn't remain a widow. There are various stories about what she did. Some of them are quite lurid, but suffice it to say that she had at least one child. Some sources say that that child was Goliath. Others say that Goliath was Orpah's great-grandson. In the latter case, both David and Goliath were great-grandsons of the sisters Ruth and Orpah, in which case David and Goliath were third cousins. If Goliath was Orpah's son, which seems difficult to believe because of the timing, but which nevertheless is cited by several sources, then Goliath and David were first cousins 3 times removed. Since Boaz's family likely never visited Moab, nor did Orpah's family visit the land of Judah, there would have been no way for David or Goliath to know of each other or that they were related. So that's the end of my discussion, and we can now move to any questions. Here's the meeting. Oh, there we go. Hello?
We're here.
Okay.
Any questions?
Maybe I spoke too fast.
Can you explain again how Goliath is descendant from Orpah?
That's from the Midrash.
Okay.
According to the Midrash, Goliath descended from somebody called Rapha Gath, who either was Orpah's husband or perhaps her grandchild.
Okay.
It wasn't Goliath.
I could not get very much information on the genealogy between Orpah and Goliath, except that some sources say Goliath was her son, and some sources say he was her great-grandson.
Wasn't he a Philistine?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was Orpah a Philistine?
No, she was a Moabite.
Yeah, she was a Moabite. She, as I said, she was a princess, a daughter of King Eglon, who was the king of Moab. And Eglon was the son of Balaam, of not Balaam,
Balak.
Balak, who was the king who sent Balaam to curse the Jewish people.
I heard, and this might be just gossip.
Well, everything that I said was gossip from the Talmud.
That Oprah is named after Orpah, but they spelled it wrong on her birth certificate.
Yes, I heard that too.
Huh.
Yeah,
Sounds
they said
better.
that in their biography.
Gossip from the Talmud. Or we could call it fan fiction.
Supposedly, it wasn't the mistake on the birth certificate; it was her mother's mistake.
That could be. But yes, I had seen that story on the internet as well.
Internet gossip.
So are we at the end?
We are. But I am so impressed at how we stuck to the schedule. It's unbelievable. It's never happened before.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Wacky. We actually kept to the schedule within a couple minutes the whole way.
Yeah.
And we even added a potty break.
Mm.
I think it's your
Steve,
training.
can you take down your screen share so I can see the humans?
I'm not sure. I don't know that I'm still screen sharing.
You are.
You are.
You are screen sharing.
Yeah, I don't have my regular window anymore. So let me try to do it a different way.
The
I'm going
host can
close-
share it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Yeah, what I did is I just closed my presentation. I closed the PowerPoint and that way
It worked.
it's missing.
Okay, so the next event on our schedule is to go outside. Supposedly, we do this at midnight. So if you want to wait, you can. I am losing it by the minute.
Mm-hmm.
Is it
We all are.
raining?
Oh, I don't know, but we'll see. Now, why do we do this? Why are we going someplace in the middle of our tikkun? Supposedly at midnight, God hears our prayers better. It's like we have a direct line and our prayers will be answered. It's a propitious time to be speaking to God. Whatever you choose, you can do it now. You can stay up if you can. I don't know how the people do it who stay up all night. It's beyond my understanding.
They must miss the service in the morning.
Maybe they do. Maybe they do. I have to go to work in the morning.
Can I?
Louis has a question.
Yes.
Or actually raise a point, which is
That's Louis.
I want to get the terminology right. Okay, so the President Biden refers to to what's his name as the other guy. Okay, so first of all, I was just very impressed with everything, all the presentations. It really was very, very impressive. I haven't been connected to things on Shavuot very much the past couple of years, which brings me to your point about it being ahead of schedule, Wacky.
Well, we're
Right.
an hour ahead.
You're right,
Of
and
midnight.
I think Leslie really was on top of things in a nice way. But all I want is this. I ask one thing of you. I don't want people saying, well, the reason why they always ran so long was because of the other guy.
No, in fact, I want to be clear that I disinvited you for many years.
It was my call, but I just don't want people, saying, yeah, well, it's the other guy, that's why we ran so late. But I do want to say that I really enjoyed it, and I really found so many of the things, presentations really well done. And I in this case, I will credit both the people in the committee, but also the rabbi. I think that he inspired some people to join it in a way that others may not have in the past. So okay, that's it. I'm going to say good yontif and close out and take care of a new planting I did outside in front of the house that I never finished. Actually,
Middle of the night?
What? No, it happens to be in an area that can be floodlit. So I'm just going out to put some more soil and what's it called?
Compost?
Compost and and compost in there. So good yontif to all. Bye-bye.
Good yontif, Louis.
How do I get out? Yeah.
There he goes. Now, the reason I just want to make clear, the reason I disinvited him for so many years is that I thought people would be intimidated to teach in front of the rabbi. So it was not for any other reason. And I think that there were people who said, oh, I don't want to do that with the rabbi there.
Well, we weren't intimidated to teach in front of Mike.
Just saying, I wanted to clarify why we asked him not to be there in the past.
I'm intimidated in front of Wacky.
And I was afraid that she'd beat us if we didn't stay on time.
No, Leslie was in charge of that. She did a great job.
I think all the speakers kept to their time very well.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
Yeah, Wacky, I think you finally whipped people into shape.
I think
That's what it is, after all these years.
That's right. That's right. Does anybody have any other question? Does anybody want to go outside? You're going to save it for midnight. I'm going to leave all that up to you. Thank you to all of the teachers. You guys were inspiring, and I really enjoyed the variety and the competence. People were articulate. They picked good things. I'm very appreciative of everyone who participated.
And we appreciate that you put it all together.
I just made a schedule.
You know, Wacky, it also occurs to me, no one person could ever have designed this with the kind of variety it has. I mean, it just you went all over the place. Yeah.
But that was up to the people who responded.
That was
Yeah.
good.
But that's
Yeah, but at least we didn't get together to make a decision. We each made our own decision, and that's why it was so different for everybody.
Well, I want to thank you all, and I'm going to go to bed.
I also want to mention that we had people kind of reinforce some of the same ideas today. I mean, we had a couple of interpretations of the Book of Ruth, 2 or 3, which I guess is a tradition anyway. And then the 10 Commandments, Cantor Sarah and Joseph. And was somebody else talking about that? Yeah, I thought it was really interesting how people were reinforcing stuff. Like Joseph, you mentioned the Midrash that Wacky had talked about maybe 30 or 40 minutes before. So that was really cool.
I was offline. I didn't hear it. So
Okay. But that was good because if you hear something more than once, it really stays.
Chips, you're on mute.
I liked how many things came back to language and speech and the significance of those things, and the black and white and the space between the letters. And then we got to the tarot stuff, and Cantor Sarah was talking about that as well. That was very interesting.
Yeah, language.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Yes, good night.
Thank
you all.
Thank you.
No one's staying up all night, huh?
Chag Sameach. Good night.
Well, not by choice.
Right.
I'm
No,
going
it's
home.
easier here in Boston. Sunrise is very early this time of year. I used to, when you're in different parts of the world, it's a lot harder to make it all the way to like 7 a.m. instead of, what is it, 3:50, 4 o'clock in the morning?
Then we could have breakfast together.
There you go. Get the blintzes ready.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Night.
Thank you, Wacky.
Laila Tov.
Bye, teachers.
Sameach.
Thank you.
Yeah, good yom tov, everyone.
Good Yontif.
It's down to 6.
I'm going to stop the recording.